The following is a conversation with Martin Schibbye, who is one of Sweden's most incredible investigative journalists, the founder of blankspot, and the author of too many extraordinary stories to mention. There are about 3.5 hours of total recording here, and this podcast is broken down, therefore, into 3 distinct chapters. If I was smart with distribution, then I would bleed this out over 3 different episodes, but I am not, and hence, the whole thing is being released here in one big podcast. So, do be a savvy podcast listener and navigate with the timestamps. Not everything will blow your socks off, but I guarantee you that there is at least something here for everybody throughout this chat. So, the 3 different chapters, as it were, are as follows. The first hour is a conversation about Cards of Qatar, which is the story Martin and his team have spent the last 2 years working on. It is a documentation of the immigrant deaths in Doha in construction of this slimy, corrupt FIFA 22 World Cup. There is so much complexity to this issue, and this is something Martin is a world authority speaking on. So it is an absolutely amazing hour from Martin there. The second hour-ish is Martin reliving the time of his life when he was imprisoned in Ethiopia. This is a well-documented ordeal Martin endured and has been made into both a book and a movie, both by the name of 438 Days. In short, I think this might be my favorite part of the conversation. Then finally, the last hour-ish, 40 minutes or so, is a bit about Martin. A bit about where he grew up, who he is, what his life experiences have been, and then how to thrive as a freelance journalist. So please do share this far and wide. I hope leading up to the tournament and then our remembering of the tournament, the FIFA World Cup I'm speaking about, we remember it as a slimy event, like we remember Beijing 2008 as a slimy event, or Rio 2018, or Rio, whenever the Rio Olympics was, as a slimy event, because Doha is a stupid place to hold a sporting tournament. As you'll hear in the conversation, we open up on it more. But ultimately, just let's remember it as a filthy tournament, because this tournament is head to toe slimy. Finally, this podcast took me over 5 hours, well over 5 hours to produce, but it will only take you 5 seconds to review. So please slide up your apps, whether that's Spotify, Apple, whatever, leave fat, juicy, energetic reviews, pump juice into the various algorithms, direct them towards a curious worldview, let them know that people are listening to a curious worldview. And I should also mention, please hang around to the end to hear my afterthoughts from the chat, and as well for me to explain my ambition for this podcast. And with absolutely no further ado, here is Martin Schibbye. Well, Mr. Schibbye, tell me about Cards of Qatar.
Cards of Qatar is a way of packaging very complex journalism in a new and innovative way to reach football fans and to give them information that could help them in this ongoing discussion now leading up to the World Cup in Qatar 2022. From the beginning, it started with I worked a lot in Southeast Asia and South Asia, and every time you fly there, you always pass like Abu Dhabi or Doha or some of the UAE countries on your way, because those were the cheapest flights, and sometimes you spent a couple of days before going to the Philippines or Cambodia or whatever the assignment was at the time. So I remember already in like 2008 when the financial crisis hit, the kind of airy atmosphere at the airport in Abu Dhabi with, deserted cars and, panic in the air and all these skyscrapers, half done, and then hundreds of migrants like gathering in the parks. They didn't have any ticket home. They didn't know what would happen. They'd lost their jobs. And I remember meeting one Indian construction worker, and I sat down with him in the grass and asked him about his situation, and he's like, "Oh, you're here to write about the horrible conditions for the workers." I know that this was 2008. And I'm like, yeah, and he, explained to me in a way that, the answer, it doesn't lie here. You have to come to India to understand why we are here. You have to understand why I went here. You could look everywhere in this country from south to north, but the answer, it's just not here. So, at that time, I was a freelancer. Time was all you had. So I went to India and met his family and met his wife and his daughter, and began to understood what a hammer poverty is, and really the decisions that he took and a lot of his, fellow countrymen took, going to the Middle East to work, to provide for their families, to get their family out of poverty. And there was also this debate starting at that time about remittance, being more important than foreign aid. Of course, they paid a huge price, people being away from their families 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. But it really had an effect on the poverty levels in many South Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. So I had this in the back of my head. And then with this whole discussion took off with Qatar 2022, there were numbers thrown around, 6,500 dead according to The Guardian, or 15,000 dead. And then the Supreme Committee for organizing the game said that no, there are 3 people who died. So yeah, this kind of bizarre difference between thousands of dead or 3 dead. And then I felt that I wanted to get away from this discussion on statistics, on numbers, because I knew these were people. And I had met many of them, before, and I felt, let's tell their stories. Let's find and talk to as many families as possible that lost someone in Qatar. So then I talked to journalist colleagues in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in India. And this was during the pandemic, so I couldn't travel myself. So they set out to talk to families. And it was much more difficult than I had thought. I thought, well, there are, thousands of dead. It should be easy to find families. But, embassies were scared. They didn't want to give out lists. Families were scared. The states were also scared because Qatar is such an, important player. Some of the journalists got nervous. And, it was really, really a tough... Every interview, it was really boots on the ground, finding the families in the villages, explaining the idea to them, getting their stories. But eventually, after a couple of months, we found a way to find stories, and that was to see, okay, who has received compensation? Because in all these states, due to the huge discussion that's been over the years, in both Nepal and Bangladesh and India, you can get compensation from the state in different ways if you lost a family member in Qatar. So then we got hold of those lists and started calling people on those lists. And that made the work easier. So then, I had all these stories. We had almost 100 stories. Not all of them were dead. We also talked to a lot of people who returned and could tell about their experience. And then the challenge was that, okay, how do we present this? How do we package this? And my first idea was, let's just publish one long article with 100 voices. And we do something like, she has written a lot about Soviet Union and Sync Boys. And she has a way of writing where she has 100 voices and she compiles them into wonderful articles. I had that kind of idea, just let's process all this material into one story. I will come up with a name. Embarrassing. Today of all days. Then my colleague Britt Stakston, who I founded Blankspot with, and she has a PR background, and her son has always collected football cards since the World Cup in 1990 and '94 when Sweden took bronze in the States and onwards. He has all these cards and he has a very special relation to his football cards. So she came up with the idea, shouldn't we present them as football cards, but instead of players we will have migrant workers, and they are also stars in a way, and just make a short version of their life story and have their picture, and then these cards could be sent to FIFA, to the sponsors, and that could create a discussion about, the real cost for this World Cup, telling the stories about those who built Qatar. And of course that was a great idea. I felt that from the beginning as an idea.
Very original.
Very
sure.
original, and it would, really have an impact and be something unique. But then I thought to myself, like, okay, but how will the families react? Would they be fine with us? Because these are dead people. It can't be reduced to a PR thing. These people are not
could be taken
with us anymore.
As a mockery almost.
Yeah, exactly. So then when the restrictions were lifted in Nepal, was one of the first countries in South Asia where you could travel after the pandemic, I immediately went back and I brought the cards with me, and I visited 3 of the families and showed them the cards. And these are also families, they don't live in Kathmandu, they don't live in the big cities, they live in the countryside. For many of the families from Nepal are from rural areas. They're not the poorest of the poorest, so to speak. But still, you have to travel far to get them and really use your feet. So I, for example, one of the families lived in the city of Gandrung, and it was Anish Gurung who went to Nepal he went to Qatar in a very, very young age. He was only 1920. The city or the village where he grew up, they didn't have a road until 3 years ago. So when the road came, his dream was to get his driver's license and then to go to Qatar and work as a driver.
His dream,
yeah. When the road came, he could get his license.
So it's almost an ambition to go to the Middle East to get this money.
Yeah, it's the way to get out of poverty, and they have also. You could also see that people who had worked in the Middle East, the first year they would change the roof of the house, and the second year they would pay off their loans, and the third year they would move to the big cities. You could really see that process happening in Nepal. The extreme poverty has dropped, significantly, from like 40% to 16-70%. So yeah, that is many people's. The dream is to go to Nepal, really, and that was also Anish Gurung's dream. He went there. He ended up in a car accident after just 6 months on the job, and came back in a coffin. And the family went to Kathmandu to receive the body. Traditionally in Nepal, the body needs to be cremated, and there is a special ceremony where you put food in the mouth of the dead to bring on into. Yeah, exactly. But they couldn't really identify where is the mouth. The body was so damaged after the accident, and they still, did the process, and then he was cremated. So I met that family, and they told me about Anish Gurung's dreams, and also at the time I was lucky because all his friends had this memorial tournament to his memory. He loved basketball, and it's also kind of a twist to it that his basketball loving young kid, died leading up to the football World Cup, but still. So there was this memorial tournament taking place in the village at the time also, and all the young people were telling me about how they remembered Anish and The family, of course, they missed the son, but they also missed the son's income. Now his sister had a job and could work, but still the situation for his father and mother was very, very tough, and they were kind of falling free now when they didn't have the income from the son. But his death had also created a discussion in the village, like, shouldn't we stay here in Nepal? Shouldn't we, get an education? Shouldn't we take this village out of poverty? Maybe that is the solution, and not just, take ourselves out of poverty. And there were many others who had chosen to work at local hotels, or his death had, changed the discussion, and kind of this glorified version of life in Qatar had been questioned. Remember, that was also, if you compare to Sweden 100 years ago, 1 million Swedish people went to the United States, forced out of poverty, and also from a dream of, having a more religious freedom and political liberty. They all, for some it went well, but for most ended up in, slum conditions, and sent letters home where they said, well, it's, pigeons falling down from from the trees, and it's rivers of gold, and because that was the expectation in a way.
But also, that was entire sort of family migrations, and the dream was that you could maybe make more of yourself than say simply driving a car, or being involved in a big construction process. Can you map out for us? It's not just Nepal, it's not just India, it's Bangladesh, a lot of African nations as well. Could you map out for us where all of this low-skilled service labor is coming from, and to which countries it's going to?
Yeah. If you look at Qatar, it's the size of, Skåne in Sweden, which is, 1/10 maximum of the Swedish surface. And there you have a population of about 300,000 people, citizens. And then on top of that, you have 2.7 million, migrant workers or guest workers running the country. They do everything from building the roads to working at the hotels, to handling luggage at the airport, to guarding the airport. And also in the domestic sector, you have people working as maids in the houses. And traditionally, the maids have been from the Philippines, from Southeast Asia, and constructions workers from Nepal and Bangladesh and India. And as you say, during the last 8-10 years, we've also seen migrants coming from Kenya, also many from Pakistan. I'd say you have the whole world, working in Qatar. But it's the same in Kuwait. It's the same in Saudi Arabia. It's the same in many Gulf countries where they opened up for migrant workers. So our focus on Qatar can sometimes be a little bit tilted in a way, because we are looking so much at the situation in Qatar, and talking to also migrant workers in Nepal. They say that they prefer to work in Qatar compared to working in Saudi or in Kuwait.
In one of your most recent publications, you told a story of a man who was working on a rural Saudi Arabian farm or something, and he had shown up to the Nepalese embassy, and he'd almost forgotten how to speak Nepalese, and he hadn't been paid after 16 years of work. This is slavery.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So, and compared to that, of course, the reforms in Qatar is something that the workers in the other nations just can dream of. But basically, in Qatar and many of the other countries, you have a sponsorship program, or it was called the kafala system in Qatar, where in order to get the job, you needed to have a sponsor in the country. So your permission to stay in the country was really, connected to your job. And that was one of the problematic things that really made the workers vulnerable. Because if you complained about, low salaries or no salary or something, you would lose
living conditions.
Yeah, you would just be sent back home.
The ultimate
or just
threat.
stranded on the street. So there was not really... It was impossible for any kind of, trade union or even, manifestation or nothing, because that you were so tied to your employer.
So fragile to their whim.
Yeah, exactly.
And they confiscate the passports too, right?
Yes. Upon arrival, they would take your passport, and especially for domestic workers, you have really, really horrible stories of people actually being basically locked up in a house, not being allowed to even go outside, and then escaping, sometimes jumping from balconies and finding countrymen that would save you and so on. So that was one of the key factors that the situation for workers were really bad. Apart from the low wages or the long working days or etc. But still the wages, compared to working in Nepal or to not working, were higher. That was the reason that people sacrificed themselves.
Can you put some numbers to that? For example, what they'd be paid relative in USD, say for the equivalent work in Nepal as in Qatar? And that's forgetting the fact that the opportunity doesn't even exist in Nepal in the first place. But just to get a sense for that desperation, because I'm shocked to hear that like a young man's ambition was to move to Qatar so he could send money back home. Maybe it's just my own ignorance, not understanding the desperations of that level of poverty. I thought maybe the ambition might be to go to the big city, Kathmandu, But so some numbers to what they're paid.
It's low. I think I have to check it up now. The actual minimum wage and what it is, but in Swedish crowns, a normal salary would be about 2,500 Swedish crowns monthly, and so that's
250 euros.
Yeah, something like that. And lately, the minimum wage has been raised to about 3,000, 4,000 Swedish crowns a month. So that's the considered well paid.
In Nepal or in Qatar?
In Qatar.
In Qatar, yes. Because in Nepal it's...
No, in Nepal it would
drastically
be even lower. Yeah.
And so you mentioned 2.7 million sort of subcontinent and maybe Northeast African workers are all the labor, all the construction, all the domestic duties. Even at the gyms, someone opening and closing the door to the gym. In countries where salaries are really cheap, they have these strange jobs. 2.7 million in Qatar, and then you mentioned there's also Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. I'm presuming this also would leak into Egypt, and this would leak into surrounding countries. Do you have any sense for the overall amount of these type of workers who now exist in this part of the world? Now, I understand that those numbers are going to be vague at best, but have you thought about it or have you read that somewhere?
I don't have that figure. I know that in terms of money being sent home, remittance by far surpasses the total amount of foreign aid. All the aid being paid by states to other states. If you compare that with the money sent home by migrant workers, that sum is much, much bigger. But no, I don't have the overall figure of migrant workers. It's growing. I know from ILO reports, and UN organizations have for the last 10-15 years focused on migrant workers' rights more and more, because they are so vulnerable and they play such an important role for the global economy.
So I first came across Cars of Qatar at the beginning of the year or something. I'm not exactly sure how I found out. I think it was because my girlfriend told me about 438 dagar and so forth. And I was like, wow, what a guy. This is very cool. And saw Blankspot and went from there. But it was coincidental timing because I had flown back to Australia for a wedding and my flight, Stockholm, Doha, Sydney. So I flew into and out of Doha twice. And having just absorbed this story that you were telling, I saw it in this really sort of slimy lens. Because it was so efficient in the airport. Because there was, say, 10 guys, manning the queue for the for the security. Whereas in Arlanda, there's no one there.
No one there. No.
And in Sydney, there was no one there. But then as well, flying in, you could see this desert because it's just sand with these sort of like palm tree made islands with Dubai-like tackiness of high rises. But then on the horizon, you see a bunch of stadiums. And I thought, what the fuck? You watch the highway going out to the stadium, zero supporting infrastructure around it. It's just a road in a sea of sand to a very fancy stadium. There isn't even like housing around the stadium, cafes, restaurants, nothing. And you just look at it and just think, this is the most absurd waste. Not only are all these people dying in construction of this, but the environmental cost of building all of this stuff, which is never going to be used again. Could you, to bring it back to the cards of Qatar and specifically 2022 FIFA World Cup, can you explain how they even got it in the first place? And we'll just leave it there.
I mean, the short answer is they bought it. They bribed officials. And since then, I mean, there are 15 or 16, I think, of those who took that decision who have been, prosecuted within the FIFA and the global football organizations. So it's clear now that they bought the World Cup because, as you say, it's surreal. This is a country without any football tradition, without any arenas, and just the fact that the World Cup this year will take place during the winter, and not during the summer is because it's too hot for the players. But then who thought of the workers working in this really, really hot conditions? So no, and Qatar, the figures differs, but some say they invested about $200 billion to build these 8 arenas in these cities.
$200 billion.
And it's it's beyond surreal, and I think that everyone now in hindsight says that it was a wrong decision to award Qatar the World Cup. But now, hey, we are here. They build all this stuff. All these people, died. Let's do the best of the situation. Let's just, have the World Cup there. But what I think needs to be done is we need to have a discussion of, which countries, shouldn't there be any criteria for arranging the World Cup in how you treat workers or living up to any human rights standards or anything like that? And you had trade unions and human rights organizations saying that for years now, that arranging the World Cup could be a positive thing that you get for doing something good, and not just award the bad guys through some sport washing scheme. The highest bidder. And some say that Qatar will be the first and the last, and that the discussion will change everything. I think this is just the beginning. I think that we will see the Olympic Games in Qatar maybe as early as 2036. I think we will see more and more of these mega sports events taking place in Qatar or in Saudi Arabia or in the Middle East.
You can bet your bottom dollar MBS has his hopes and dreams on Olympics and FIFA.
Yeah. I mean, it's as long as in a way money talks, that unfortunately will be will be the situation. On the other hand, football is nothing without the fans, and we can see now how football fans, all over the world are really, really upset about Qatar and really, discussing Qatar. And a year ago or something, there was this idea for a super league in Europe, where the teams would not play in their local national league, but join a super league instead. But the reaction from the fans was just so strong that this whole idea was scrapped, within a couple of weeks. And there is, that power. The fans still have that power, to determine whether this is the future for football or not. And especially the national football organizations have that power to say that, well, we are not playing in Qatar, we are not going to Qatar. And that discussion now is starting to gain momentum, but it's in a way it's too late. 10 years ago, you had the Swedish national team going for training camps in Qatar, and no one was really questioning them. It was a bit strange that the players couldn't drink beer or those kind of angles, but no one really questioned Qatar or the human rights record in Qatar or. But now everything is on the table. Now everything is on the agenda. So let's see what happens. On the other hand, I think, as a journalist, now having all these stories with workers that died. In Nepal, I also met the equal amount of people who had stories of how happy they were providing for their families. And at the passport department in Kathmandu, the lines were really, really long, and people were dreaming of going to Qatar, trying to get their exit to get their work visas, and they borrowed money. They sold their parents' land to borrow money to pay a recruiter to get their job. And I remember also one of the interviews that really made an impression on me on my latest trip to Kathmandu was this old trade union leader. He was before a Maoist. He fought in the insurgency to topple the king in Nepal. So he's really not. He's really not a right-wing kind of guy, so to speak. This is an old guerrilla fighter who later on was the head of Gefont, the trade union in Nepal, and he sounded the alarm back in 2012-13 and said that we are getting 7-8 Nepalese workers dead home in coffins every day. Qatar is a slaughterhouse, and people are dying. And now I went up to him in his office, and he just looked at me and said that for me, Qatar is the greatest victory in my lifetime when it comes to trade union rights. And he said, we abolished the kafala system. Nobody thought that would be possible. Everyone told us that they will never, ever, the Qataris, sign any agreement that takes away that power from the employer. But they did. And today, on paper at least, the kafala system is gone. It's abolished.
And what is that?
The kafala system is the sponsorship system where you are your right to stay in the country depends on the contract you have with your employer. So it's the sponsorship system basically. And he saw that as a huge victory. And he said that we could just dream about getting those kind of demands in Saudi Arabia or in the region. And I think we also need that as a perspective, all these debates and all what the BWI, the Buildings Workers International Trade Union, all what they have done has really in a way had an effect. Qatar has changed many of its laws and made a couple of reforms. And I think from a journalistic point of view, it's crucial for us to also point this out. Otherwise, Qatar would just feel that, it doesn't matter what we do. we still have this one-sided debate where we are the bad guy and we are just using the labor's and so on. So I think we need to also see that and highlight that and make the issue also complex, and that also leads to a conclusion where you don't see these dead workers as as objects or just victims. They were the best of the best when it comes to putting tiles or making the floors or building things, tunnels and whatever. As one of the families said, that we should be proud of them, proud of what they built. I mean, look at what's been built in Qatar. It's been built by workers from South Asia. So we should also feel that they are good at what they do and proud over them in a way. So in a way, I feel that maybe as journalists we need to make things a bit less black and white and try to find also the nuances in telling this story. At the same time, of course, we should never take down the pressure on Qatar in any way, but we also need to have these perspectives and nuances in the reporting and in the reportages that we publish.
Yeah, because that's the first I'm hearing of any angle that isn't just pure victimization. These people have been taken advantage of. It's synonymous with slavery. In fact, you're saying that no, these are actually highly sought after opportunities that they're chasing. How do the stories of abuse filter back to those in Nepal, people you're interviewing and talking to, when you say to them, hey, this guy died of this, they're dying of, young, healthy men are dying of heart failure. It's so hot and hard. How are they reacting to these sort of stories?
The families or
the individuals who are keen to go over there. The guys standing in the line in the Kathmandu,
Yeah, that's a really good. That's a really good question. I mean, they don't see that in a way. I'd say that the whole debate is still glorified, and the whole they just see the opportunities, and they just see the life that they would like to get. And many people also, I met people who worked in Qatar for maybe 8 years, and they haven't saved a nickel. They haven't saved anything. They just work and spend their money, and then come back to Qatar, and then they go again for a new trip and come back and spend their money. This was also something that the authorities in Nepal and many of the researchers were focusing on, that we need people to plan for migration. We need them to have a plan. Okay, you have this 5-year plan or 8-year plan. In 8 years, you want to buy this hotel or you want to buy this piece of land. Then you need to save this amount every year. And they are trying more and more to reach the people going with information about the laws and about the current laws in Nepal and the rights and so on. But still, for many young people, it was an adventure and a way to get out and to get away. Of course, it's a huge problem for many of these countries where you have the skilled workforce, leaving the country, and it's in the short term they pay a high price, but also in the long term, when it comes to developing the country, it's problematic if such a huge percent of the population is actually working abroad,
totally
somewhere else.
There's the economic problem of the brain drain, famously, which all these countries already suffer from, because the best educated just go get a job in America or Europe. But that's actually an interesting point I've never thought about. What about the labor drain?
No, it's a challenge for the country, but now they choose to play this game, and in a way also like one guy told me in a village that if I want to take a loan and I tell the bank I'm going to Qatar, everyone will lend you money.
Right.
But if you want to loan to build a hotel or start some kind of local business, no way.
Wow.
Someone will not lend you money, and that
The
also
incentives are all wrong.
Yeah. So
Shit.
that's also problematic. So no, they were not really afraid of going, and it's also interesting. One, young woman I talked to, she worked at a hotel. She didn't receive her salary, and she just stayed on working and not working for about 16 months before she was able to go home. And then the Nepali community collected money for her ticket so she could go back to Nepal. And then, she told me it was not good, and the situation. But then on the other hand, she was looking to go away again to find another job in some other country. And then we became Facebook friends, and I looked at her Facebook posts, and they were all her standing in front of these famous buildings in Doha, in front of the hotel pool, in the hotel bar, enjoying life, with a drink. So though she had been there 16 months without the salary, for all her friends following her in Kathmandu, they would just see her romanticized version of life in Doha. And in a way that taught me something about also the shame and not returning as a Gulf woman or Gulf man in a suit, taking your family out of poverty, but
almost
keeping
the
facade. Keeping the facade of being this successful overseas worker in a way, which was really,
it's also fascinating
bizarre.
as well. Like how status games are played locally. For her to show off a drink by the pool is the most unreal luxury of a rich person. For these young men and women standing in the line, keen to go to Qatar or Saudi Arabia, even though they know about these stories, is it a very sort of adventurous proposition that's being presented to them? Like, go abroad and create the best version of yourself? Or is it simply money's better there and you can send money home that way, so that's where you go?
Money.
Yeah, it's all money.
And the push from the family, and sometimes push from a whole village. One guy I met actually in the line to the passport department told me that like the whole village had collected money so that he could get this job. So there is a huge burden on their shoulders, and also, they are deeply in debt before they go, because you still have these middle recruiters which are illegal. In Qatar it's illegal, and also in Nepal it's illegal to, you would approach someone in a village and say that, hey, pay me, $4,000 and I will get you a job in Doha. And they would pay this guy $4,000 and then they would get a job. But this guy in the middle is just, a broker of some kind, taking advantage of the labor. And sometimes there is a job, sometimes there isn't a job. And this is something that also Qatar always points to, that, okay, we are trying to get rid of this, these scams and these, people not getting paid, and we try to spread information that no one should have to pay for the visa, etc., etc. But still there were many horrible stories of people being fooled and paying a lot of money to get the job.
And the local organized crime just gathering people, promising them the...
Yeah, and then of course paying back the loan would will take you a year or something, and then you're still there. So in a way, if you take a helicopter perspective, in many of the cases it's not a good, time-wise and money-wise. It's you don't come back as a rich person, but while you're there, and as long as you could send back money home, your parents will have a better life and they will have food on the table. So that kind of responsibility for providing for their families, what pushes people to go, and also pushes them to stay. And now also with everything becoming digitalized. They can send their salary in a second through their mobile phone to the parents' mobile phone, and that has also changed things. So it's easier to send money.
Isn't that such a wild thing to think about, that you can come from such poverty that an entire village will rally around one individual to go abroad to earn maybe $2,500 a month, and that'll at least make some people whole back in the village. Yet they still have a mobile phone to communicate with someone on the other side of the world. How does it affect you seeing this level of poverty, and then you return here to Stockholm, where CSN will make a whole village rich. One person, which CSN is university payments, will make one entire village rich in another country. How does it affect you when you think about it?
I mean, it gives you perspectives, and I think that we don't really, value the situation we have in Sweden. Living in one of the richest countries in the world, and having the right to express ourselves and print newspapers and publish things about Qatar without being afraid of being sent to jail or so on.
Zero threat.
But on the other hand, I think that we should still complain about things in Sweden. It's not the standard. The bar shouldn't be Nepal, rural Nepal. That's not the bar. And I still think it's important to also, from a journalist point of view, point out all the things that are unfair in Sweden, and systems that doesn't work, or people being abused by the authorities in Sweden and so on. It's just as important, even though we have that experience. That's always been a thing, working as a foreign correspondent. You meet people that are in horrible conditions, and that are poor, or that are wounded, or jailed, and I think there is a time where you feel that, well, I could give this woman $100 and that could change this person's life. But if I do that, I would also stop being a journalist, and then it's better for me to work to work with aid, or to join an NGO, or to try and change the world, or become a politician or something. Because I still see journalism as as a craft, or as we have a special role, and if we are so affected by the things we see that we feel that we have to do something more than just write about it, then I think you need to take a break and maybe just stay home for a couple of months and recalibrate, and then hit the road again, because it's also dangerous. Many people say now with Cards of Qatar, like, okay, shouldn't you collect money to the families, or shouldn't you? And in a way, I see that would be a nice thing to do. But on the other hand, paying for interviews or paying people for talking to me, people would say the most horrible things to receive that money, or they will make up things.
Yes.
And
the incentives
and the incentives would just go wrong. But that would be really controversial. If someone else does that, that would be fine. Some NGO or Amnesty or whatever picks that up, and there's this also demand now for FIFA to pay the families of the migrant workers. That's being pushed. That's one thing, but I think it's important as a journalist not to do that. I'm not a fundamentalist, of course. If someone is starving, you give him food or water, of course. But I see there is a line where if you cross that line, you are no longer a journalist, but an activist. Sometimes you have to cross that line to still be human, to another human, of course. But the solution is not. The job we do is to describe the world, and then it's up to others to change it or to, do things with that information. And then we mix up the roles. We will also take away what is unique with journalism. But yes, sometimes you feel that, maybe I should become an aid worker. But then usually I take a break and sleep, and then wake up and take a teaspoon of cement and, just write the story. Yeah.
It's funny, that line between activism and journalism, you actually mentioned to me off air before we started recording as well, because these cards of Qatar, which by the way is going to be the top link in the podcast description, so people can see visually just how striking it is to see a card that you would associate with Ronaldo, his mugshot, his overall stats, etc. But instead, a migrant worker's mugshot, how he died, how old he was. It's very striking. It's a touch morbid as well, but that's the point of it. It stays with you. You're going to be in Doha at the FIFA World Cup, handing these out, trying to shame sponsors, trying to almost enforce is the wrong word, incentivize boycotts and so forth. That's getting into the activism that you're talking about.
And for me, the cards is to, it's a hand grenade to get the attention, and then to get people to read the articles and the long form stories that are on, the site. And in those stories, you have all the complexity and all the different voices and the different opinions and the nuances. And I see the cards as, as a headline. Here's a headline. Read the full story. You need more than just an individual story, than just the card. But no, you're right. It's balancing on a thread. But also, I also feel that as a foreign reporter, we need to try and reach a new audience. I can't just complain, no one is reading my 60,000 character stories. I have to try, my best to package journalism and interviews and stuff in new ways to reach football fans. And now this is, one way of reaching football fans with these stories. But no, I totally agree. There is a risk of becoming an activist, and also if you would really go all the way that line, that's where the wind is blowing now. So it will also be, a story that makes things more complicated doesn't become as viral as a hit piece on Qatar or something like that. And that's a difficult thing. I see really in our, and maybe I'm trying, to eat the cake and to have it this with the cards thing, not becoming an activist, trying to let all, sides have their best arguments, talking about this issue of migrant workers. We discussed this before Qatar. We will discuss it after Qatar. It's not only, this wasn't a problem created by the World Cup per se, that migrant workers are being abused.
10 years ago.
10 years ago. Yeah. It's so I want to say all that, and that you can do in a 60,000 character story. But I think the discussion needs to start with the individuals that actually, paid the highest price for this tournament to take place. They paid with their lives. So let's start there, and then hopefully the discussion can then be more complex and more nuanced. Yeah.
Can you lean into your Swedish brethren and perhaps have the Swedish football team, I don't know, perform a stunt on behalf of you with the cards, for instance? Because I know it's super high risk to any official involved with the cup to do this, but if ethically they feel so compelled, which it's very possible that someone might be, that would be a hugely impactful way to generate attention to this, which is ultimately the story of the migrant workers and the conditions there.
Yeah. We tried to reach out to a lot of football players, many have really strict contracts where they are not allowed to basically say anything or do anything, which is really interesting. I didn't know that they were so restricted in what they're allowed to do. There's also this, I mean, I haven't, David Beckham is officially bought by Qatar to talk about the World Cup. But then you have a lot of players also being paid by Qatar to stay silent. They are on,
Wow, is that a case?
They're receiving, payments.
Hush money.
In a way.
Oh my goodness.
And so it's been difficult to find football players, especially active ones, that are prepared to speak out. There are some unique cases like Tim Sparv, the former captain of the Finnish football team. Okay. He, went to Qatar on a training camp and got asked a lot of hard questions from journalists. And I mean, he's an intellectual, thinking, reading guy, and was like, felt I don't have the answers to these questions. Migrant workers and human rights, and was used to answer about the results only. So he started to contact migrant workers, talk to them, and really did his homework. And then he wrote a letter to FIFA and to the football community a year ago, where he basically said that we need to talk about Qatar, and we need to talk about the situation for human rights in Qatar. I mean, that was beyond brave, and hopefully that can inspire more people to take a stand. Right. But he was, I'd say he was unique. There has been a couple of others that are not active but are retired professional players. But it's so maybe. But there's also, if you look to the States, you have a lot of, big sports athletes that are political in a way, that will take a stand and will have opinions. Yeah. In Europe, that's still kind of a no-go, and youth. Traditionally they don't do that. Though you had Ibrahimovic now sitting next to Berlusconi this morning on Instagram. Yeah,
but Zlatan loves Milan.
So maybe there's more emotional than a political explanation to that. I don't know. But still, it's rare. But yeah, hopefully more people will, like Tim Sparv, actually speak out, because they have a huge, following, and they could really do so much more than just win games. These players, if they want to use their voice, and
perhaps as well, just the taste left in everyone's mouth throughout the tournament and after would just be one of slime and almost guilt for having participated in watching this and enjoying it, because the common denominator across everything is buckets of money. And the numerator on each individual cause is ethical problem, corrupt ethics, but the money. For instance, David Beckham, when I saw that video of him promoting it, I couldn't put my head around it. He's already got more money than he ever needs in his entire life. Why on earth attach yourself to one of the slimiest things that's ever happened in your sport? But I guess shitloads of money wins at the end of the day. Same thing with Saudi Arabia and the Live Golf tournament. I don't know if you've seen this, but I don't want to pass judgment on the players, because I think if I was in their position, what would I do if I was offered $100 million to show up? But I guess the common denominator is shitloads of pinger.
No, but then also you have people tend to forget about the fans, because without them there would be no football industry. There would be no one watching the games, or and I think that more and more fans feel the power that they the power in numbers in a way, and they were able to stop the Super League, and they will they also have the power to in a way to stop the World Cup in Qatar from taking place, if there really would be a worldwide boycott.
That would be something.
But then maybe you also tend to see the discussion from a European point of view. In other countries and nations, you don't have the reporting about Qatar as we have in Sweden. In many local debates, it's the human rights situation in Qatar. It's not an issue. So
wow, yeah.
that's once again a reminder of maybe the status of journalism in the world in a way.
But also just local cultural differences. Which isn't to pass a judgment on different cultures, but just where in your hierarchy of things that get to your attention. Where it is less egalitarian, somewhere like Northern Europe. It's more just taken on in stride. There's a lot of corruption there. Next news, please. So I think you have about 100 of these cards, 100 stories. You mentioned at the beginning that The Guardian reported as much as 6,500 dead. Do you have any really insightful figure for how many have died?
I mean, it depends on how you count the numbers. The Guardian figure was based on reports from embassies, and you looked at from this date in 2010 when Qatar was awarded the World Cup up until 2019 or what it was, and now there's 2 more years to add to that, and then you look at how many people died in Qatar during this period of time, and they came up with the figure 6,500. The Guardian didn't say that these people died building the arenas, but that became, through whispers and through rewrites, that became kind of the truth, that 6,500 people had died building the World Cup arenas. And I mean, that would have been grotesque, people would, fall, hundreds a day, it's just not possible if you think of it, So these are people that died from, car accidents to cancers to all sorts of, suicides, a lot of mental illness. And then the question is, can you blame the World Cup for these people dying? Would they have died if they had stayed in Nepal or India or Bangladesh, or did Qatar contribute to their death? And this is the ongoing discussion between Qatar and many journalists for the last 5-6 years. Is this figure high or is it low? How many people would have died within a 2.7 million population during a 10-year time? Then maybe 6,000 is not a high number. And it's like the COVID discussion, how many died from COVID-19? Is Sweden, a positive or a terrible example? It all depends on how you look at the figures. So, and I felt that, what we wanted to do was get away from that statistic fight and just look at the cases, talk to the families. And then what we could see quite early on is that there are so many cases where no one knows why they died. They die in their sleep, and they often have complained about being sick, being forced to work while they're sick, working long days, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours in 38, 40 degrees Celsius of temperature, not drinking enough water. And I mean, according to researchers and academic, that could be a cause of death. Actually, you work so hard, so the body it can't manage the heat, and then you die during your sleep. There are no autopsies taking place. The bodies are quickly packed into coffins and then sent back to their home countries, or buried in Qatar. So one of the question mark is really, why did they die? If Qatar wanted to find out why these people died, they have one of the most advanced healthcare departments in the world. They could have done that, but they have chosen not to do. There are no autopsies. There are not even, in most cases, any real examination into what happened at the workplace or any kind of legal process taking place. That is the pattern that that we could see talking to the families. So I mean, in Cards of Qatar, we tried just to tell the stories and to tell as many stories as possible, and then we could see some patterns. The journalist that I know who has been closest to actually answering the question, how many died and how many are related to World Cup constructions, it's an English guy called Nick Harris. He managed to get all the 15,000 names, because according to Qatar official statistics, during this 10 years' time, there are 15,000 deaths. So he looked at every case. It took him over a year, in Excel, and he went through every case. And he took away the cancer, and he took away the accidents, and he took away the road accidents, and just kept, the workplace. And his number was between 2,500 and 3,000 that are, construction, roads, arenas, hotels,
service
related
as well?
to Qatar.
Domestic and things like this?
No, I think he took those away. So I mean, you could go down that way. He did. He had Qatar's lawyers all over him and the newspaper, but he published a week ago in Mail on Sunday, I think, a story where it concludes that figure. So. Right. What surprised me, I mean, looking at the statistics, is actually not those who died at the workplace, because I knew I would find those cases. It's the amount of suicides. There are so many suicides, both in Qatar, but also once they come back home in South Asia. They came back home without, taking their family out of poverty, getting back to your village, having just money to pay for a new roof, and then it's finished, and then you spent 8 years away from your wife. You missed your kids growing up. They are grown ups now. When you left, they were children, and that is something that that really shocked me, and that I'm actually now working on seeing a pattern in this, and the mental illness in this group. I think it's just huge. And also talking to some of the labor organizations, I asked about this, and there was one guy from the Philippines and one from Bangladesh, and both said that no, suicide is not in our culture, and that made me even more convinced that this is really something that is not talking about even by the labor rights organizations, but it's just there as a hidden cost also of this World Cup. And thinking of it, I mean, some people I talked to, they spent 15 years in Qatar, and then you come back after 15 years. Everything has changed. Your whole country has changed. You missed so much. You missed all those birthdays, all those anniversaries. Everything.
Critical identity problems.
Exactly. So that price is, that really surprised me, and is something that I will try to look into more. And also all the suicides in Qatar, often just before going home or just before the contract's finished, or so people will be found hanging in the shower, or found by their co-workers at their houses and so on.
The cause of death issue is a strong theme in what you've been writing as well. So you just spoke about the suicide aspect of it, but as well all of this sort of inexplicable heart failure among young, healthy men and women. Are you suggesting that this is just a sort of slap-on cause of death when they don't want to reveal what the cause of death is? Say, trauma to the head because he fell off something, for instance?
I think it's a practical thing for the air companies. In order to take a dead body on an airplane, you need a paper, and you need a stamp on that paper that says, why did this person die? So it's a practicality in Nepal that they would just put natural cause of death, then put the body on an airplane, and then just fly it back to South Asia. Problem solved. So I don't think that anyone considers this as a natural cause of death. Young people dying. And also before they went to Qatar, they all go through a medical exam. Most companies also, before they do their first days at work, they go through a medical exam. So these are people that are considered healthy and who are just employed in their best years, and they die, or they are found dead in their sleep. So of course this is beyond natural. This is not at all natural for them to die. But it's just the bureaucracy that that forces the Qatar Airways and other air companies to. They need this paperwork done to put the body on the flight, and then it's just the most practical thing to write. Because if you would write, something else, that would imply that this needs to be checked up in a local court, or if you would write murder, that would also call the alarm, cause of death, falling from a high-rise building. Then there would be someone investigated who might be responsible for not taking all the safety precautions, and of course they want to avoid that.
It must have been, you did allude to it earlier, it must have been so much work to definitively get the life stories out of these people, to contact them, the families, go to, locate them, speak to them, have the translator, get all the permissions for over 100 different people. This is really an extraordinary effort. Talk a little bit about how long you've been doing this story and your experience and how much effort it has been to do.
Yeah, I mean, we started in the autumn 2020. So that's about 2 years from now. So 2 years. Maybe we started in the summer, actually, summer 2020. So about 2.5 years, and we also had local journalists then in India, and two different teams in Bangladesh, and then in Nepal, two different journalists, and then myself also going to Nepal looking for cases. It took time, but I also think that we had the World Cup as our deadline, so we knew that this might take a year or so to collect all these stories. And after publishing them, we were also hoping to get more stories from other journalists or from NGOs or from trade unions and so on. And it has started to happen that we published a couple of more that were, other journalists had written about and sent us. So hopefully that will also continue. So it could be like a crowdsourcing process where we can tell more and more stories leading up to the World Cup. But I'd say after we found the lists from the different government bodies handing out compensation, when we found those lists and could call people from those lists, everything was, up to that point we were more like looking in the dark, trying to find articles in local newspapers, or calling cases. But when we found the lists, we had a method. Then we could call the lists and then visit people on the lists. So that was, the breakthrough process when we managed to get the lists, which made the process easier in the countries. Yeah.
It's interesting just for me to sort of project onto the work of the investigative journalism, because in 2 years, a couple of articles have been produced on this, but the amount of work that goes into developing that story and having it original and exclusive is quite something, And so this is for blankspot.sc. How do you finance it? How does that business work? How much do you sort of front load the costs of this story, or do you get some sort of funding beforehand, or is this old profits that are reinvested and then you may create some sort of money off the story later? How do the economics of it all work?
I wish I had an answer to that, but and basically, of course, in the end, when you have all the material, you're afraid that someone else has done exactly the same thing. You know,
Right.
you know, soon
Yeah.
publishing. But we started off early. We went to there's this because of course you have to think. I mean, as a freelance, I'm used to, you know, you do the work, you found the stories, and then I know that good things will be published and you will be able to sell it. So I have, I mean, I've been working as a freelance journalist before starting Blankspot for, I don't know how many years, since ever. You know, I never, some people are good at, you know, pitching in advance and, you know, but I worked in the opposite way, you know, just going to countries and then trying to find stories, because you never know what you will find. And the problem with pitching a story is that you're kind of locked then into that narrative. And if that's not the situation on the ground, maybe the story is totally different. You would still have to, you know, make some magic and find those cases that would fit that narrative in a way. So I've been always working the other way around, you know, just, you know, having time and going around and finding stories, and then I know that I have the ability to write them in a way that they will be, you know, published in Swedish media. So it was, but now, you know, working with Blankspot, it's a bit different, since we also try to find, of course, media partners when we have something big, but we also have our, you know, core readers and that will, you know, pay us monthly or annually some contribution for us to do our work. We don't have any paywall or anything, but some people on our mailing lists will, you know, donate money for us to do the work. But that is quite a small sum, and so for this project, we understood that it will cost a lot. Especially, we wanted to pay the local reporters. I mean, really well, since, you know, we're doing a story about migrant workers. We, you know, also wanted to
you don't take advantage of some in the process.
Exactly, and also to get them along and explain the whole idea for them early on. But we went to a football app called Forza Football, and the CEO of that app, I've seen him, you know, talking about the role of the football industry and that the football could be a force for good. So I approached him with this idea and said that we have started to collect stories. We have this idea to present them as cards. Would this be something that you would be interested in you know, making happening? And he was really interested. So we had, and he also said that once these articles are published, we could send them to our users on this app. The app is basically an app where you get football scores in live, so people will just report scores and send them live. So it's an unusual partner.
Yeah.
But he had this. How do you say? No, his heart was really in, you know, football as a force for good, right. And this was also a way for us to reach fans in a way. So he came along, and then we also asked. I mean, one how do you say, like layout design company. Could you do the design? And they agreed to do the design pro bono because they really liked the idea. Yeah. So then we had, you know, two wonderful partners that made it possible. Mm-hmm. And then we were supposed to publish on February 24 together also with a Swedish media partner. But then we all know what happened on the 24th of February. Russia attacked, you know, Ukraine. So everything was postponed, and we lost the Swedish media partner. But then shame. Eventually, you know, choose to just publish on the site that we built, Cards of Qatar. So and translate thing. And then we managed to find 11 Freunde, which is a German football newspaper, and a paper in Czechoslovakia, and now there is a French magazine and a Norwegian magazine, and also there's this community called Swedish Fans, which were really super interested in the material. So we also have a partnership with them now, where they could rewrite and republish the stories. Mm-hmm. And now just this morning, I got an email with the layout of the cards, and that Pressbyrån, where most people, they have shops over all of Stockholm, like 7-Eleven, you could say. They agreed to put the cards next to the official Panini cards. So they will be
really
next
powerful.
to the Panini cards.
Yeah. And what's a Panini card?
Panini card is like the official Qatari with the real football players.
Yes, perfect.
So you would have the football players, and then next to them, I just got an email with a picture of like a box that was designed with the cards in small packages.
Mm-hmm.
That will be. I think the idea is now to give them away, like to hand them out, not to sell them.
Sure, yeah. With a QR
we'll
code on it that takes you to blankspot.
Exactly. That would be the idea.
100%.
Now. So
that's amazing.
So 2.5 years ago, I didn't even think we would have physical cards.
Yes.
We just see it as a
and that's
digital
something,
way, and now eventually the story grows, and the only new thing for me, as being a reporter, is also handling, as you say, like, okay, how do we finance this? But at the end of the day, we always made sure we found a way. But it's not easy. You just have to trust the material you have, and the idea and the stories, and eventually it will work out. Yeah.
And again, the people listening have to click on the link at the top and just see what it is we're talking about, because it is such an original way. You're not telling the story through the cards, but you're generating the attention and delivering the message through them. Yeah. And from there, you can read the longer stories and understand the depth behind everything that we've been speaking about so far in this. Yeah. But I'm looking now, we're doing this for an hour and a half, and I plan on talking to you about one other giant story in your life.
You're hassle editing it then. So
but
the easy part is talking.
What about... to round this off, Cards of Qatar, FIFA World Cup, Doha. What is your goal when you go there? Because you're going to be there, I think it starts in November, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be there, you're going to be handing out the cards, you're going to be trying to put shame on the sponsors of the event.
Yes.
And the officials, I suppose, running the event.
Yes.
So talk us through what you're planning on doing.
I'm planning first to go to Zurich, to FIFA. They have received the cards, but they haven't responded. So I have to go there and knock the door myself and get their comment on the stories in the cards. And then I plan to go to Doha in Qatar, and also to try and get interviews with officials and get their comment on what could have been done to prevent these deaths, because these people will no longer be there when the World Cup is, when the judge starts the first game, Ecuador against Qatar. These people died, but they died building things and making this World Cup possible. So I think in a way, shame is a strong word. I'm not accusing them for the death of these people. I'm not accusing them for murder, but I want them to learn the names of these people and the names of their children, and I want them to remember these people, and I want to hear their thoughts of how to make sure that this never happens again, and what are their thoughts on the future of these mega sports events, and what have they learned, so that these people won't just disappear. And also for fans to learn the names, I think it's important, because it's not just migrant workers or construction workers or thousands of dead. I think that they need to know that, okay, who was Anish Gurung? Why did he leave Gandrung, his village? What was his dreams and his ambitions? I think that's what I want to do with the cards and the stories. And then we will see if they, I still haven't received my journalist visa for Qatar, if they let me in.
Yeah, sure. One other thing, actually, before we round it out, you say that shame might be the wrong word, because of course we're not.
Maybe shame is the right word.
We're not accusing them of murder.
No,
but what we are accusing them of.
Of course, they have a responsibility. Sponsors. I mean, you have Coca-Cola. If you read their, ethical investment policies, there is a lot of, fine words, but still they sponsor this event, and you have all these unexplained causes of death and people not returning to their families. I want to hear their opinion on that. You have Budweiser, you have, of course, Qatar Airways, and those companies might be more difficult to get hold of. You have Adidas and so on. And I actually received a response from Adidas the other day where they say that, well, we have nothing to do with putting the World Cup in Qatar. It's not our decision. Yeah, but it's still your decision to sponsor the event and thereby to promote it, and thereby making it possible. But it's interesting that they actually replied, and it's also interesting that 4 of the sponsors have now said that they think FIFA should pay compensation to a fund that could go to the migrant workers' families.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that has happened just last week, and I mean, in a way that it shows that the drop can damage the stone. It just needs to.
That's a
shows
very
that something
a
is
very English
happening.
translation of
Maybe.
the Swedish saying.
Sorry. Yeah.
That I think we understand.
You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Eventually all these articles, all these stories, all these testimonies, it's starting to take a toll also on the sponsors. It's starting to feel that they are getting criticized now, and it's interesting that they are now, changed, not just saying, whoa, we have nothing to do with this, but saying that, well, the migrant families should be compensated, which is huge.
Yeah, 100%.
And which shows that it's important now to just keep on pushing and keep on asking questions for the last, weeks that are left now for the World Cup.
And as I think about it, I remember in for the Beijing Olympics, but then as well the Rio de Janeiro Olympics, one of the main topics of conversation that shroud both of those events was local conditions and the human rights violations of the countries, China more specifically, in working conditions in Brazil.
Yeah.
And I don't think people remember anything else from those events.
No.
And it definitely stained the Olympics. So perhaps after all of this just endless financial corruption, there is as well now, they're in bed with... We're making the case for human rights violators. As we come closer to it, in a year that's had a war, fucking crazy stuff in the financial markets, maybe that drowns out a lot of the media. Yeah. But as it comes in, maybe this is really going to take off, and the Qatar will be spoken of in every corner of the world, feasibly. Sure. I think the FIFA World Cup is bigger than the Olympics. I think it is actually the most viewed tournament in the world, right? On the calendar. So
and if the legacy is all the migrant workers who died on their jobs, of course that it will change the equation for future host countries.
What about one word on the financial corruption piece? What have you learnt about it that we as a just casual consumer don't already know?
I mean, for me, many sports journalists are much better at looking at the financial corruption within FIFA. I don't think I ever spelled FIFA on my in an article before this. I mean, my angle getting into the World Cup was my experiences in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and having written about migrant workers. So of course the corruption happened early on. I mean, it happened, years back, and the people who actually bribed officials for this World Cup to take place in Qatar, many of them have also been prosecuted for mostly for other things than actually the Qatar decision, but still they were the same people. I haven't. In a way, you have a lot of sports journalists writing about Qatar, and they are experts on FIFA and corruption and the whole sports industry. I'm a foreign reporter who comes from South Asia and who never written about sport before. Now I'm into the field from meeting the families. Yep. So when it comes to corruption and the trials, I've seen them. I've noticed them.
438 dagar.
438 days.
Precisely.
Yes.
Set the stage a bit. When did this happen? Where was it? Why are you there?
Back in 2011, we have a region in the Horn of Africa, in the eastern parts of Ethiopia, called Ogaden. I had met a lot of refugees from Ogaden. There were refugees who I met in refugee camps, also in Nairobi, in Sweden. And the stories these refugees were telling me were really, really horrible. There were stories of villages being burnt down. There were stories of systematic rape. There were stories of, gross human rights violations in this area. At the same time, this, summer of 2011, there's a lot written about a Swedish-linked oil company called Africa Oil. And they have bought the right to look for oil in the same region from where the refugees are fleeing, in the Ogaden region. But in the Swedish kind of business newspapers, this is just described as a huge opportunity to earn a lot of money. Like, buy these stocks, they will soon find oil. This is a unique opportunity. And that's where I'd say the story kind of started. On the one hand, we had these refugee stories. On the other hand, we had this Swedish-linked oil company talking about the possibilities of getting rich. And that's sometimes the case as a journalist. You have this story on one hand, on the other hand, and in the end, time will tell. But then, I see as one of the main roles for a reporter is to find out, who's telling the truth, who's lying, whose version of the truth is correct in the Ogaden region. So, together with the photographer, Johan Persson, we decided to go there and to see for ourselves. How is the situation here? What do the villages say about the Swedish-linked oil company? It turned out to be impossible, since this area was sealed off from the world. No one was let in. The Red Cross was kicked out. Doctors Without Borders were kicked out. Foreign diplomats were kicked out. Journalists who tried to enter were arrested and kicked out. So, in a way, this made us even more, concerned. What's going on here? What's happening, in the Ogaden region? All these people fleeing, the Swedish oil company on their way in, and then there was also a conflict. If you look at the map, you could see that the east part of Ethiopia, it's a border to Somalia drawn with, a ruler on a table, in Europe in late 19th century. So it's really not. It doesn't represent, the historical or religious or cultural situation on the ground. And then you had a rebel movement, the ONLF. They were fighting for independence, or for a referendum, actually, so that the inhabitants could vote. Like, should we be part of Ethiopia? Should we be part of Somalia? Should we be our own country? But basically, they were fighting against the Ethiopian federal military. So we had two choices to get in. Either in a way trying to persuade the Ethiopian army to take us to these future oil fields, which we doubted were, impossible. They just wouldn't, let any journalist in. So then we approached the rebels. They were terrorist labeled in Ethiopia, but not in Europe. So they had an office in London. We flew there and talked to them about the possibilities, entering illegally into Ethiopia. And we made a plan together with the rebels that we will fly to Somalia, to a city called Galkayo, and we would hire a smuggler there that would take us across the border. And then inside Ethiopia, we would meet up with a rebel group, and they would be our guides and take us to the oil fields. So, yeah, that were the basic, the plan.
What a plan.
Yeah. So, and I've been asked, many times, like, do you regret going in? And of course, knowledge in in hindsight, it's not so impressive. But of course, with all I knew, what happened, I would get shot, I would get mock executed, I would be sentenced to 11 years for supporting terrorism, I would spend more than 14 months in the notorious Kaliti jail. If I knew everything, of course, I wouldn't cross that border. But there at that time, we had these stories from the refugees, and we felt that, no one else is doing this job. We have a Swedish-linked oil company. We have refugees, pouring out of this region. Something is happening in here, and it's our responsibility as Swedish journalists to find out, what's this company doing? What's their role in this civil war? And at that time we choose to cross the border, and immediately things, go wrong. We cross at nighttime, and after a while I see these, we are supposed to be alone in the desert, but I see these lights from a Land Rover or some Jeep, at the horizon. And I look at the driver and I'm like, are these the guys meeting us? And he looks at me with like panic in his face and then just steps on it, And then there is this crazy car hunt which goes on for 2-3 hours where we try to shake them off. And eventually, when you drive in Sweden, there's this thing called snow smoke. Like there's so much snow coming up from the rear wheels so that you are blinded by your own light, like the following car. That happens with the sand as well after a while. So we managed to drive away from the Ethiopian army that are chasing us. And suddenly the driver, just stops, opens the door, throws his Kalashnikov to the ground and just, runs out in towards the horizon. And, we are sitting in the back seat, and I, take my recorder and the video camera and like, okay, what's happening? We are just left here in the desert. And then eventually we hear voices, and there's this, soldier, doesn't look like a soldier, looks like, a young Bob Marley or Rastafari opening the door and like, assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam. Oh, are you the journalists? Yes. And then those are the rebels, and they're like, quick, we need to run. So they burn the car, and then we just run, from there. And then it's like 3 days and 3 nights of running, trying to escape the Ethiopian army, because they are onto our tracks. And, we walk in circles and we do all kind of tricks, like rabbits, trying to get away from the fox. And yeah, we run out of water and just, keep going. In the beginning, we just walk, during the night, but then we have to walk both during the day and during the night to get away. And yeah, sometimes we see the cars like searching for us. We could see the lights. And eventually we reach the area where the rebels say that, we are safe. And we start to do some interviews. We could talk to the commander. We start talking to villagers and get a sense that, the conflict level in this area is so much higher than what we anticipated. It's a war basically going on here. And if you enter a war zone as a foreign oil company, there might be, consequences when your security is based on an army that might commit, crimes, and that might lead to that the company will be asked questions about their role in this. So we feel that this is really a story to tell. And then, the rebels are really relaxed. They make a fire, they make bread, and we get water finally. And then suddenly I hear, a gunshot going off, a Kalashnikov. And I just think to myself, good God, let this be someone just flicking with this gun, an accident. And then, everything just explodes with Kalashnikov fire and machine gun fire. And we are attacked by about 300 Ethiopian soldiers. And the rebels, they run like this. And they take our stuff with them, cameras and computers and things, which we have intentionally. Yeah, we talked about it before. If this happens, they say if we are attacked, we are outnumbered. I mean, that's the rebel ABC playbook. So if they meet the army in the open, they know they're outnumbered, so they just run. And our chances to survive is not to run like the rebels, but to try and, just put our hands in the air and surrender ourselves, which is rather difficult because it's a kind of bushy area. We are, in a place where the visibility is very low. You could see maybe 5-10 meters, and then there are a lot of bushes which they were kind of hiding inside. So there are, you heard gunshots firing many times, but I never heard this sound of bullets, passing your head. It's like more of a ting, 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 ting. It's a sound you don't want to hear because you really feel that I'm on the wrong side of this. So it's a chaotic situation where you hear these shouts and you have this gunpowder smoke and smell of gunpowder, and then quite quickly I'm shot in the shoulder. I see Johan, the photographer, he's shot through the arm. So I could just see this big splash of blood, all over the sand from his arm. And yes, I just put one finger in the hole where the bullet went in, and then another finger where the bullet went out, and tried to raise the other hand above my head and just shout like, media, don't shoot. And then I see a soldier coming up to me, and he doesn't shoot, but he turns his gun the other way and just knocks me with the back of his gun towards my head. Yeah, and then I fell down in the sand, and yeah, that's where the story about oil dies, you could say. It dies there in the sand. And in the beginning, of course, there are thousands of things that go through your head, like, okay, how do I make these people understand that I'm a journalist and not a terrorist, because you could see that they're really scared. So I remember talking football with them, like asking, what's your favorite team? And like Sweden, and I'm like, oh, do you know Ibrahimovic? And I remember this soldier looking at me like, Zlatan? And I'm like, yes, he's a brother from another mother. And this soldier's like, you big nose too. And then, like bonding with him, and he's like, sorry I shot you. And I'm like, it's okay, shit happens. Yeah, so anyway, Zlatan saved my life in that chaotic situation. And then, we kind of expect that, okay, this is a misunderstanding that will be sorted out, we will be kicked out, they will take us to the embassy, it will be embarrassing for them for shooting 2 foreign journalists, but yeah, shit happens. But that's really not what's happening. Instead, they fly down their regional vice president, and he decides to spend the coming 3-4 days making a mockumentary, like with a film team, where he, basically fabricates evidence that will be used in a court to sentence us for supporting terrorism. So he wants us to say certain things in front of the camera. When we don't agree, he threatens to deny us antibiotics for our wounds, and he also arranges a mock execution to make us cooperate. And so also takes like civilians we never seen before and say, these are your rebel friends, these are the terrorists you are supporting, and totally surreal days in the desert. And then when they are finished with that, they eventually take us to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. And the rest, it's not a story about oil, but a story about trying to survive in that prison, about press freedom, about meeting local journalists in that same situation. Basically, trying to survive for the 400 days that are left. Yeah.
Is it sort of traumatic for you to think about those times? I can hear it like a slight quiver in the voice when you talk about the mock execution and being shot and so forth. It's been now 10 11 years. Yeah. So how does it sit with you now?
It's interesting how it goes from being an experience to being like notes in a diary hidden in the prison, to a published book, and now a story with like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a bit of humor, and it's in a way it's been very processed, and I'm lucky to have done many interviews, in Swedish about it, so that's been a way of handling it, talking about it, which I think is important. But as you say, the difficult part was really the mock execution part, and that's the part I don't really, go into detail. I guess I could, but I choose not to, because that was kind of more traumatic, being in jail as a jail journalist. Of course, yeah, it's tough, and there's no justice and so on, but you're not afraid that you will die. And during some days in the desert, I actually thought that these are my last minutes on this earth. So of course there's a difference between those traumatic experience and kind of just the pain and shitty experience of being jailed. So yeah, there is a difference, but no, it's not traumatic to talk about. I'm also, extremely privileged. Had I been Somali or Ethiopian, I would have been shot in the desert.
Right.
I would still be there.
Crazy.
So that's, but I lived, and that comes with the responsibility also to witness and I've survived meeting this army in the desert. Many people weren't that lucky and couldn't tell the story. So that's why it's also been important to tell that, tell that story in a way.
And when you catch up with Johan Persson, how much of this sort of brotherly comradeship do you have for having gone through such an amazingly unique but bonding experience?
Before this assignment, we didn't know each other. We shared the same freelance office in Hägersten in Stockholm. And I think that was a good thing, because we got to know each other under these kind of extreme circumstances, taking these life and death decisions together. Should we do this? Should we do that? And, I'm really proud of how we handled prison and how we handled everything during these 14 months. Once we were free, this pressure kind of disappeared. And the first month, Johan slept at my couch, and we went back to the Horn of Africa. Actually, we went to Eritrea together and did stories. But it's been like, what we have together is a trauma. So we like to hang out, but we also got really, depressed being with each other. And after a while, we felt that, no, let's just, divorce. We have Ethiopia as a common child or something, that experience, but I see him maybe, once every second year or something at some journalist thing, but we are not. You would think that you are this, like super tight forever. And of course we are. If I would, go to prison again, I would immediately, call Johan. He could join me in the cell. I wouldn't want to be in prison with anyone else. It was the best, really. But it's more, the relationship in freedom, I'd say, is more, it was easier to have a relationship in prison than it is in freedom, in a way. But so we do our things but we don't do them together, in a way.
And what about Lundin Petroleum and Mr. Carl Bildt, who I noticed still has a very big profile and was featured at the elections recently on SVT. So he's one of the names as maybe our future foreign minister again. He's one of the names being discussed now after our elections. For me, it's a mystery that he put himself on that board. Having his experience and his background, there are so many organizations, so many jobs he could have taken, and he chose to get in this, small, very, very
maybe small is the wrong word, but special oil company. I mean, this is an oil company they were kicked out of apartheid South Africa. They were kicked out of Congo. They did business with Assad in Syria. You know, one of the founders, Adolf Lundin, Adolf, by the way, was his name. He had this motto, like, no guts, no glory.
Yeah, my God.
So they go into, and they're a bit, you know, like freelancers in a way. You know, they go into conflict zones where no other, like, normal oil company would go. And they try to find oil and gas and then build up some kind of business and then sell it off. So it's really a high risk, high reward business that they have been doing for many, many years. And they were also active in Sudan during the war in Sudan. They were especially active in a block called 5A, where 160,000 people were forced to leave, and thousands were 20 or 30,000 people were killed.
And I've never even heard of that.
No, and eventually they left Sudan, but there were so many reports of what happened in this Block 5A during their time in Sudan. So now there's actually a unique criminal case in the first court in Stockholm, where they are asked questions for violating humanitarian law, that they made it possible for the army to commit crimes by assisting the army and by being there at this time. And of course they defend themselves with, you know, everything they have, trying to say that no, this is not within the jurisdiction of this court, and this is not. And it's an interesting case in a way. It's the first time since the Nuremberg trials that a company is trialed for violating international law. So it's very interesting what will happen with that trial. So this was the company that Carl Bildt got on the board on, and I don't know why he did it. I'm just reading now. He published a book next week. It will be out. His biography.
Oh, okay.
It's called My Wars.
Do you expect to feature in that?
No, he doesn't mention Sudan at all.
Okay.
Which is bizarre. He doesn't mention Iraq, which was also a war he promoted, which is bizarre.
Perhaps he would rather people forget about.
Yeah,
those
but
things.
it's makalöst. I don't know. It's no, and so he was on the board, and that of course made this whole issue huge in Sweden, because he was a foreign minister during the time we were jailed investigating an oil company which he had been on the board of. At that time, he was no longer a member of the board when we were jailed, but he was accused of, you know, having these two different roles. And I think that in a way that worked to our favor, because it made him work day and night to try and get us out, because it was a huge problem for him, more than Meles Zenawi, the Ethiopian prime minister, that we were there. It's but the whole idea was also, you know, not to be too late, as in the Sudan case, but rather, you know, more like a proactive journalism. Okay, it's 5 to 12. These things might happen here if this oil company goes in, and you know, not just, you know, be there after the earthquake, so to speak, but before. And hey, this could happen. That was the idea with going in, also doing this story so early on, because they hadn't started to, you know, they started, you know, drilling and looking for oil, but there was no active, you know, oil exploration going on.
It's such an interesting feature of Sweden, you know, this country which I love so much.
Yeah.
But you can be so egalitarian, somehow very socialist, somehow very individualistic, but then also somehow just produce these caricatures of extractive capitalism. You know, with this Lundin Petroleum being such a poster child. It's
such a popular stock also. I mean, it's, if you look at, like, the big owners are not big companies, but, you know, ordinary Swedes, which feel that it's, you know, it's really popular among small savers, or how to say, this company also to invest in.
It's an oil company.
Yeah, and today they are, they really played it safe, so they sold off almost everything and just have exploration outside the coast of Norway these days. So they're really kind of, they are not.
Perhaps like Volkswagen or Hugo Boss or something, they can turn into a great renewable energy company with very shady origins.
Probably.
Yeah, that's what is their reputation now? It's just sort of, what do you call it? White bread? Normal?
I mean, I say this ongoing trial, it doesn't get the attention I think it deserves, because it's so unique. And they've also been good at, buying art, sponsoring art centers, both in Norway and in Sweden. A bit like art washing, trying to get a better name for themselves and their company. Yeah. And of course, they would say that, to journalists, they say that, but we created peace in Sudan. Oil exploration, it contributes to peace and economic growth. And I mean, that's fine. You could say that to a journalist doing as an article, but I mean, try that in a court to a prosecutor. I mean, they will point to this evidence is happening in 5A and they will, we created peace. But apparently, no, this happened. Please answer my question. So that's really interesting to see what questions the legal system could get from this company that journalists hasn't been able to get. Yeah.
So you've gone through this horrific time in the desert, gone through a Kafka-esque trial, I think you described it as. Yeah. A show trial. Where they were showing these videos after we were captured. And then there's also one stupid thing that we did before we went from Somalia over the desert. We spent, more than a week waiting at a hotel in Somalia, and that we got to know the guards of the hotel. And one day, we were playing football with them, and they were like borrowing Johan's tobacco, and he was borrowing their Kalashnikov. And then I had a GoPro camera with me, so there are some seconds of footage where Johan holds this Kalashnikov, and that footage was found on us when we were arrested. And of course that was gold for the propaganda, Ethiopian propaganda apparatus. So that footage was shown during the trial, and then we were, accused of terrorist training, taking drugs and then doing terrorist trainings. And the drugs were the two mortal
Swedish
sins.
Snus. Yeah. Of course it was, immensely stupid to hold a gun. You should never do that as a reporter in any conflict area. But
really?
Yeah, but
just because of the lesson you had to learn the hard way?
Yes. I mean, and I know all colleagues have those kind of pictures. But it's really a lesson to learn. How can these pictures be used against you? And they were really used. But they also added like gun sounds to the film. And then when we objected and said, hey, we didn't fire, the finger is not even on the... you don't fire a gun that way. And the prosecutor would say, well, we added some gun sound just to make it clear what your intentions was. So, as you say, totally Kafka-esque. And then we were sentenced to, basically for moral support of terrorism. And Ethiopia, they have a terror law that says that if you have any kind of relationship with a group that's terrorist labeled, then you are the messenger of this terrorist group, or the messenger boy. So it's a law that criminalizes journalism, because how can I do my job if I'm only allowed to talk to the government and not to the opposition groups, even though they are armed? It's the job to talk to both sides. So basically what was on trial was not me and Johan, but journalism was on trial. And we also had, colleagues from the States, from the UK, flying in, testifying and explaining to the court how does the journalist work. Journalists who crossed borders in Libya or Syria, and like this is how we roll. Sometimes we break laws, but we do it to do our job, to bring home a story and to tell our viewers and listeners and readers what's going on in these areas that are closed off to the world. This is not terrorism. This is original reporting, using your feet more than Google, going to the places. But the judge just shook his head and then sentenced us to 11 years for terrorism.
Of which you spent
14 months. So in a way,
prison.
yeah.
So explain the conditions, the everyday life of this place.
I mean, the worst part was actually before we were sentenced, when we were kept at the police station Makalawi in Ethiopia. Then we were kept separated in isolation, and the cell was about 2 times 3 meters, a wooden floor, concrete walls, and then a wooden floor above the cell. And I mean, what I remember thinking back is really how difficult it was to be, just on your own, just with your own thoughts, and trying to, navigate and trying to, like, okay, what does this sound mean? What's happening now? And because that was really I think isolation is such a horrible thing to be in, because you always have someone to talk to, or you have your cell phone, and you are not really used to be, on your own. And then hearing the sounds, and in the beginning, when I heard the sounds of, steps or, body against body, or this kind of sounds, I thought that, well, they're exercising, they're jumping, or they're training the police. And then eventually I understood that no, there's a pattern in the sounds. In the beginning they scream and shout, and then towards the end it's always like silent and this kind of just dragging sound. And then I understood that, well, this is the sound of torture. These are, fellow prisoners being tortured to confess different made up crimes. And, hearing that and understanding that these people are screaming because they're tortured, it really, you are not strong in that moment. You're, you felt that is my turn next. Is it Johan that they are torturing? Really, your body just wanted to lie down and cry, basically. And you try to find something within you that, strategy or something. And I remember that, everything that you knew by heart was so important. Like, this knowledge by heart thing, every like poem or song, or that you could just, entertain yourself with, was really like a tool not to become crazy in that cell. It was so important. And then also it was cold, it's rainy, and Addis Ababa is 1,500 meters above sea level, so it was freezing cold nighttime. And then to stay warm, I started to run, and then I got dizzy, running around clockwise, and then anti-clockwise, it was still dizzy. And then it's like, people have been in cells for thousands of years, there must be strategies. And I remember that there is this book by Arthur Koestler called Night at Noon, I think is the English title. And his character, Rubashov, he runs in figure eights in the cell. And that really works, You could run, for kilometers without becoming dizzy. And that, feeling, just running in figure eights, reading poems to yourself, you felt that by, these small victories, you adapted to that situation, being locked up. And eventually also, dividing freedom was, you never thought about freedom. It was just a non-issue. It was like, okay, how do I get a soap? How do I get a toothbrush? You had these goals. Okay, these coming 14 days, my goal is to get a toothbrush. And then, you worked your way trying to get the toothbrush. So, your life became very small, but it was also a way of adapting. The main strategy, or the main... in the beginning, we still thought that, well, hey, they will let us out. That was what the Swedish ambassador said, that, just stay cool in the pool. Don't make this into some big international media thing. Stay low. They will kick you out. But then I remember seeing one other prisoner who was in another cell at the women's department. And when she passed my cell every day, when she went to the toilet, there was something with her that kind of, stuck out. Her hair was clean, and she walked very straight and looked so confident. So I always wondered, like, who is she? Why is she here? And then when she passed my cell, she, flickered with her eye, and then when it was my turn to go to the toilet, I found this small matchbox, and in the matchbox she had written a letter on toilet paper, and on the top of the letter it said that if you find this letter, please destroy it, because no one can read it. And then she wrote that her name was Reotta Lemo, and she wrote that she was a journalist also, and she had written many articles about the government that were critical, and that was the reason she was here. And she wished us luck, and she wrote like, I hope your gun wounds will heal, and if you are released before me, please tell the world that I'm not a terrorist but a journalist working for the truth. And that was signed by Reotta Lemo. And I remember the feeling tearing apart that, and getting rid of that evidence and that letter, that we were really, this was something much bigger than just two Swedish journalists chasing a Swedish oil company. We had ended up in a crackdown against free speech in Ethiopia. And Reot, she became like our teacher, and the bathroom became like our university. Every day she had new letters and new messages for us. She explained why she became a journalist, and she said that she was a preschool teacher, but the situation in the country was so dire, so she chose to start writing, and she loved journalism, she loved the truth, she loved her country, and that decision kind of brought her to the cell. And in a way that she was proud of being a journalist, and eventually that gave you some kind of strength. You felt that, okay, fine, jail us, chain us, humiliate us, do whatever you want, but you can't take away what's the most important thing for me here. It's I'm a journalist, I'm a reporter, this is my job. So she gave me that kind of strategy to find a meaning in the suffering and get up in the morning and take this teaspoon of cement and then, start thinking, okay, try and remember, how does this look? If you were the interrogator, got very angry, you were like, oh, this might be a good scene in the book. And if he threatened you with death sentence, you were like, I need to remember his exact phrasing here. And what does he look like? How does his table look like? Does he have pictures of his family? And, starting remembering names and dates. And it became like your mission to tell, one day I will be free and I will tell this story. And, Reot really gave me that key to surviving in prison as a journalist by putting on this journalist armor in a way. So that helped. And then eventually we were moved to Captivity, which is, 8,000 people in 8 different zones. We were in zone 6 in Hulit-Injabet, which is room 2. So we were 800 in our zone and about 200-300 in our room. People everywhere. The floor was, so covered with people at night time. So you couldn't see the floor. You just saw bodies everywhere. And but also, my only experience from prison was from the movies. You've seen prison movies, and it's always violent and threatening. And I thought when we were brought into Captivity that we will have to fight for our lives. You need to hit the big guy hard early on and so on. But what met us, in the prison was something totally different. There were such warm hospital people that really welcomed us into this community, gave us a mattress, water, food. People shared what they had. And also there is within the Ethiopian culture this huge tradition of taking care of guests. So they were like, your guests in our country, we're sorry we can't provide more for you now. And at that time we were also portrayed as terrorists on the state TV, which was on 24/7 in the prison. So they also took a risk, the other prisoners, really welcoming us into this community, this family. And the first word I learned in Amerindia was nubla, which is like come and eat. And I don't wish anyone to spend a day in that prison, but I wouldn't want to be without that experience. It's not survival of the fittest. No, in that situation, it's, forming small families, collaborating. That's the key to success, to survival, by working together with other people and experiencing that was, I mean, kind of unique, and also gave you perspectives. I mean, as you say, as a journalist, you are privileged, and you do these interviews, and then you go to the journalist hotel and you take a beer and you sleep in this nice soft bed, and then you fly home. And now suddenly you were doing this interview with this guy, but then you slept next to him, on a concrete floor for more than 400 days. And that, though we were tourists in a way in that situation, and we were not in any way as in the situation as our fellow prisoners. We had an embassy, we have, diplomats, families working for our release and so on. Still, it gave you a perspective on suffering and being not only a bystander watching and writing, but also participant in a way, and also experiences that I think makes me today a better journalist, to have seen, the world from that perspective. But of course, I mean, looking back, it's like also it becomes a story, and you remember the laughs and the good people, and I mean, it's also a situation where people died through simple curable diseases, ammonia, tuberculosis. About once a month, someone died and was carried out with his feet first. And also people who spoke politics were taken away, disappeared. People who objected, to the prison authorities were taken away. And eventually that also, got to you. You could wake up in the middle of the night thinking, did I say something bad about the government in my dream? Or, you started to censor yourself talking to Johan, just talking about, food or the weather, not about human rights or the story.
How Swedish of you.
Yeah, maybe that's explanation more than the censorship. But you get scared, and that's. I worked in a lot of authoritarian states and dictatorships, and I thought, well, it's a tough time not being able to vote, or you have to vote for this and that party. But being there, you really felt what does it do with all human relations when people don't have the freedom of speech, when people are afraid of talking. It really affects everything, and it makes you stupid. You become like a vegetable or something. It really. So that was the difficult part. I'd say when once a month turned to over a year to like, how do I not become a vegetable in this environment, which was all about making you convinced that you had done something wrong and that you deserved to be there.
When we were speaking earlier about the Nepalese communities and the poverty, and maybe later we'll get to speak about some of the other experiences, and now you're in the prison, how has it all affected your ability to empathize? Do you find yourself significantly more empathetic having gone through these experiences?
Yeah, I think I cry more after the prison, yes. I think I'm more affected when people tell me what they've been through. It hits me harder, yes. But it might not only be the prison, it might also be that, now I'm a father myself. I have 2 kids, 2 girls. Also, that also kind of makes you more. You cry more.
It softens
me up a bit than before, I think. So I can not only blame the prison for that. But of course it changes you. Yeah, it does. Yeah. No, but maybe not to the worse. And I think all kind of traumatic experiences changes people in a way. You learn things. And what I noticed, working in the field again, is that I'm afraid of these legal, challenges, or I'm afraid of that someone will knock on my shoulder and say that, well, this story is forbidden to report on, or this group is terrorist labeled, you shouldn't meet them. I didn't, care about that at all before. I mean, I talk to who I want to talk to. I'm a journalist. It's my job, you know. I talk to terrorists, and I talk to governors, and I talk to politicians. It's not. But now I'm really hesitant in, like, especially terrorist-labeled groups and how I approach them. I mean, I don't send them an email like, "Hey, I'm coming to your country," and I see that kind of that criminalization of journalism by terrorism laws or different national security laws as one of the great dangers ahead for reporters to work. And you could also see that it works, you know, by jailing journalists. They silence the message, and it doesn't cost anything to keep journalists at jail. And I mean, if you look at 2 Swedish journalists in Ethiopia, but you also have, I mean, I'm thinking the Al Jazeera team that were jailed in Cairo for with Peter Greston and the others. You have so many cases also where international reporters are jailed, and it doesn't have any consequences, you know, financially, diplomatically, or legally. States have learned that, you know, violence against journalists work. You know, it's a cheap form of censorship, and that is, that is scary. On the other hand, I mean, in taking risks, I feel that I don't have the same kind of checks and balances anymore. I mean, I don't cross borders, but still my perspectives in, you know, what can be done and can't be done has been kind of, the goalposts has been moved.
Sure.
I mean, I broke into brothels and to find evidence, and I, you know, when I was in Togo a while ago, there was this Swedish Togolese democracy activist who was jailed and in prison. And I'd been in the country for, you know, over a week, and it was my last days in Lomé. And I thought to myself, shouldn't I try and get into the prison and get an interview with him? Because I covered, you know, everything else. So then I just, you know, put on my jacket and pretend, using the best French I have, that I'm his lawyer, and managed actually to get, you know, through the first gate and the second gate and actually into his cell. And he's very shocked to see a Swedish lawyer he didn't know of. But then he shows me that he's tortured. He has clear evidence of torture on his hands, and his health status is very, very bad. He's very, very sick. And then I get out of that jail and then quickly to the airport and, you know, fly home and file the story. And eventually also the attention around his medical situation creates an opportunity where he's released. So in a way, it's also, it hasn't made me more, you know, careful in a way, but maybe more innovative in also the need for journalists to push boundaries and to, you know, to go as far as possible to get the story, or to get, you know, yeah.
The type of risk that you took, colluding with the terrorist organization, illegally entering a country that had a shocking precedence against the type of crimes you could be accused of, it's just an extraordinary thing to do, you know, in terms of the risk. You know, I'm sure you always ask this, you know, how do you think about risk? What do you think about risk? So I'm trying to avoid asking you that bland of a question. But I just think of myself, if I was in your shoes, would I have the balls to do that? And do you think about it in those lines, like, wow, this was a gutsy thing to do? Or instead, maybe, did you just underestimate the risk, for example?
I think I will be totally honest, the really courageous thing to do would have been, after 14 days in Galkayo, after seeing, you know, a strange jeep with a lot of antennas, after all the delays, the brave thing to do would be to just, you know, call off the story and go back home. But that decision is so much more difficult to take than to actually cross the border with a smuggler.
Really?
Yeah.
Because your ego's attached to it.
I wouldn't say the ego. It's, you know, we are so close to investigating these important testimonies by the refugees. We are so close. They are just there, you know, on the other side of the border. the villages are there, the human rights violations are there. We are so close. No one else is here. We need to do this. If we, go back now, we will probably never return. And also, we were there on a freelance basis. We invested, so
That's
much
true.
money
Sunk
in this
cost.
story, all the costs, satellite telephones, everything. So that's why also, now on Blankspot, being an editor, when I have reporters out, I don't let them take these decisions themselves there, because you are just too close to the story. They should be taken in an air-conditioned office with someone who has slept and had a proper breakfast. And looking back, I say that had been the brave decision to call things off. But it's extremely difficult to do that, and it's something I try to tell also when I'm teaching at the School of Journalism in Stockholm, to tell the students that is a brave thing to do. You will be in situations where you feel like, okay, should I go to this next village, or should I, do this? I need one more interview, or I need this. That it's a brave thing to call things off. And I think the way logically I can explain to my brain to do it is to, no one knows what I could have got, and apart from me, with the photographer who's there. Usually the readers, when they read the article, they don't know that, there was another village with this story and they never went there. They don't know that. So, that's, maybe just a way in your head
to justify.
To justify, calling off the story, because it's so...
You still have a great story.
It's so difficult. Yeah, you still have a great story.
How much better it could have been.
Exactly. So, but with that said, I think, you have to do the best of the experience. And at the time, also, this group was the new terror law in Ethiopia. It was actually passed by the parliament the same day we crossed the border, or the day before. We didn't know about that. Right. So the stakes changed. But even if I had knew it, I don't think we had cared really, because at that time I believed in my press ID, and I believed in that being a foreign reporter would be a get out of jail free card. Because this was also the first case where foreign journalists were actually prosecuted and found guilty of, supporting terrorism for talking to one part in an ongoing conflict. It's, there had been cases, but their names were Mohammed or Abdi or etc. that were common. But this was the first time there was a Martin and a Johan, and I think that also, I thought that my press ID would be this get out of jail free card, which was not, and that's an experience also. To being a journalist, was the thing that I was caught with my fingers in this jar where they don't want anyone, and that's why they also took this chance to show the local journalists, look what we can do against these two Swedish guys. Imagine what we could do to you, and send this message of fear, basically. I think the Ethiopian authorities saw this as an opportunity to use us as a pawn in the game. This is also 2011. The Arabic Spring, it's still a thing. You have Libya. Gaddafi is shot and arrested in the autumn of 2011. So, of course, a country which has, at that time, 96.5, I think, of the seats in the parliament, of course, they are afraid of an Arabic Spring situation in Ethiopia, and they choose to act rather than being, acted upon by some other pro-democracy group or anything. That's also one of the reasons things went the way they went.
Take us back to the prison briefly. I think you gave a lovely explanation for why it might not have been just become the alpha in the yard, but the Ethiopian culture really shone through, and they wanted to be hospitable to a guest, even though you're all prisoners, you a guest. But maybe some of the sounds and some of the smells and how you would eat, and to live 14 months in such a for a Swede from Norrbotten, no less. You've got 10 kilometers squared to yourself. So just take us back to the prison and try and give us a sense for it.
I mean, basically, the word prison leads your thoughts in totally the wrong direction. I mean, if you try and imagine just a field, like a music festival maybe or something, and then you have like barbed wire and fences, but instead of stages with musicians, you have these guard towers with machine guns, and you have basically barns made out of corrugated steel, and the overpopulation is, I don't know, maybe the room was built for 60 or 80 and we are 300 people in the room, so it's people sleeping everywhere, bunk beds with 2 and 2 in every bunk, and then the floor is just packed with people. There's even at bedtime one person responsible for packing the floor, so people would lie down with their shoulders down, one by one, and he would be like responsible for pushing people, so that everyone would fit into the room.
How did you manage that discomfort?
I mean, you try and think as a reporter and try to just remember it. But then you also, you knew that it was so cold, so after a while, people would, crawl up against each other, and then would be small rooms where you could put your feet, so you could go to the toilet, which was on the other side. There were 2 toilets for all 300. So you could actually, walk across this kind of sea of humans. And then, I mean, every morning you have the police shouting "Kotra, Kotra, Kotra" and banging with their batons on this corrugated floor, corrugated steel walls. Like "Kotra, Kotra, Kotra," it means counting. And then you get up, and then all 800 in the zone, because there were like 4 rooms with 200-300 in each, stood 2 and 2 in these long lines. And then it took maybe 20-30 minutes to count everyone, and then usually some police just did a mistake and everything had to be recounted again, all 800 again. And the fascinating thing was also that the prison was run by prisoners. It was almost like, these World War II capo systems that you read about. The police took care of the outer perimeter, but there were prisoners counting prisoners. There were prisoners, cooking the food. There were prisoners. There was this prison committee that was handling out also physical punishments to prisoners who didn't obey. And then every Monday we had this called Gumgamma, which was a meeting in the prison. And it was a tradition also from the war, where Ethiopia, kicked out Mengistu, and at the time the current government took power. They had this kind of Maoist tradition with self-criticism in a way, and that lived on in the prison. So every Monday we had this self-criticism session where we were supposed to answer the questions like, what can we as prisoners do to improve the situation in the prison? And then when someone is like, hey, people are dying, we are not taking to court, this guy, he's totally forgotten, he's been here for 3 years. And then the committee would be like, no, that's not the topic. On the agenda is, what can we as prisoners do to improve the conditions for the, like Monty Python, totally bizarre. And these committee members, this is the agenda. And then the second point was always on the Monday meeting, how can we improve our relationship to the police? What can we do to improve? And then, especially the foreigners, because there were, people smuggling drugs from Nigeria or from Cameroon or whatever. I mean, they would object sometimes, and like, this is bizarre, Can't we talk about our human rights? We want to call the Red Cross, we want to call the Geneva, and those peoples were usually like moved or warned or punished for speaking out. So it was a bizarre system, really. And it was also, I mean, it's not called a prison, it's called a rehabilitation center. So everything was about rehabilitating us politically and making us understand all the good things that the government was doing for the country. And
it's a cliche to say, but it's so Orwellian.
It's but it's funny you say, because me and Johan, we said to each other, we need to do something, or we will not we might survive, but mentally we will be damaged heavily, from these sessions. So we asked people in Sweden to send us books, and we thought we could start a small library. And a lot of people sent books and postcards and letters, and there was this censor working at the prison, checking everything, reading everything. And he was really upset because he had this huge amount of work suddenly. His whole desk was covered with postcards, and he was very angry, and he said, "You received all these postcards. This is a provocation. You need to stop. Tell people to stop writing. This is not helping you." And he censored them all, and he burned them. But still, we saw them on his desk. So it was, and that meant something. That was more important than food and water, to see that, there is a support for us. We are not forgotten. Because that was the fear as weeks went into months, that this would be natural. 2 Swedish journalists are jailed and we are just here. But seeing all those postcards was really a sign that there's a debate going on in Sweden where people discuss human rights and oil companies and all the things we set out to put the spotlight on. But then there was also this 2 piles of book I remember on his desk. One pile with forbidden books, he censored them, and one pile of approved books. And then I remember on the top of the pile of forbidden books was The Age of the Warrior. Robert Fisk has written that one, right? About 20th century history, all the wars and everything. And he's like, "You're a convicted terrorist and you want a book called The Warrior." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's Robert Fisk. He met with Bin Laden." And he's like, "Bin Laden?" Very much illegal, just throwing it down. But then carrying the other pile back to the zone, we had the George Orwell, 1984.
It made it through.
Yeah, you made it through. And we have
the irony of that.
Yeah, we had Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago. We had, Kafka, the process, because people thought they were funny sending us these books. I don't know.
They just think, or maybe he just reads them as, this is fiction for them.
Yeah, and that censor was either he was had great humor, or he was, grossly incompetent in his job. I don't know.
Terrific
what's worse.
Humor, yeah.
Terrific humor, like haha. So we had this, library with all these books, and we started to lend them out, and also something to do during the days. Suddenly we could read, and that was really something to. You could really escape the prison by reading, and I also remember it was not maybe the political books that were so popular, but I remember one guy from Nigeria, he borrowed The Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway's novel, and he read it, and then a couple of days later he came back to my bed, and he returned the book, and he just said, "This was a very bad fisherman." Not getting that whale fish up. And I'm like, hey, I never heard that angle to this story. And he's like, "I was a fisherman before, and I would have done this and that when I get these huge fishes," and blah, blah, blah. And it was nice also to talk with him about something else than his crime or smuggling drugs, or suddenly we could talk about the ocean, about boats and fishing. And so the books that we got in, they really, improved our lives, hugely. But then, of course, there was also one Lonely Planet we received from Ethiopia. And then there's a map at the beginning of Lonely Planet, which also has a border to Eritrea, 2 countries at war at the time. And we were reported for planning a terrorist attack on the border. And then we're like, this is a joke. Why would we sit here and plan a terrorist attack? And then there were one other prisoner who confessed guilty and said he'd done this together with us. And then things went, from a joke just to, really, really uncomfortable. And so we just said to the Swedish ambassador who had begun to visit us that, you need to stop this. Just tell people to stop sending books. It's become too dangerous, this kind of library project. And eventually, that we got out of that map accusation somehow. But it's... you could, by reading, you could be free, in captivity. If you had a book, you could really escape. So that was and you had time to read. I mean, that's something that I can miss. You know, you had time to read from sunrise to you could really spend your time reading in a way that I kind of miss. Yeah.
You took a terrific risk hiding a USB stick at one stage.
Yeah.
In the midst of all of this stress and anxiety of what you're going through, you still, you know, held on to the Weverse and really made that happen.
Yeah. I mean, it was during one of the interrogations after meeting Reota Lemo and getting this strategy. I'm a reporter. I got the courage to actually, during the interrogation, to first create a bit of a chaotic scene, and then stealing. There were memory cards on the table in front of me, and I managed to steal one of the memory cards, which I think is the card from the video camera from the desert. So I know there are interviews on it that can be used, and I mean, I'm so scared that I'm shaking. I actually steal 2 cards, and this morning during this interrogation, the police officer, I don't know why, but his son is in the room as well, and he's like 4 or 5 years old or something. And this child, he sees me steal the cards, so he starts shouting when I do it, and he points to my sock because I put them in my sock. And then I'm like, okay, he's right. Here it is. So I hand back, one of the cards, but I still have one in my sock. And there's a bit of confusion, and it's, kind of sorted out. And then back in the cell, we have this soap. And I mean, I think it was kind of the Escape from Alcatraz or something I saw, where they hide things in a soap. So we try it. We have a soap, and, we slice it into 2 parts and then make a hole in it and then put the card in a plastic and then wrap it into the soap and then just make it whole again. And that feeling, having that memory card, it feels like, you won. Okay, they won everything up till now, but now, everything changed. Now the odds changed to our favor because now we have this memory card with everything on, all the material from the desert and everything. And then we are charged and moved to Kaliti. We managed to bring this soap with us and then bring it into the prison, a place where people would, die for a soap. And then we like trying to defend the soap and not, no, you can't borrow it. Why? No, it's a special soap. So we managed to hide it in a prison where it's really valuable. And then during one of the meetings with the ambassador, when there is one guy from the embassy who's there, who's also rather brave, we tell ourselves, we know this guy will be there. Let's open up the soap. Let's try and smuggle it out. So we take the memory card and we hand it over, and then it's eventually shipped to Sweden. And, we can't sleep for days because we are just thinking, they will open this card, they will see all the interviews we did in the desert and everything. And then the next meeting with the ambassador and the first secretary, we are so anxious, like, to hearing what was the reaction. And he's like, the card was empty. And we're like, no, the card was empty. So for months, we kept on. But it didn't really matter, just having that card during those months, it was so important. So, of course, we were devastated, but it's not. It played its role. But in the movie, I know they changed the story. So in the movie, the card is filled with evidence against incriminating evidence. So yeah, but I think the reality is even better. It's a better story with an empty card than a card filled with evidence.
Yeah. Before we move on to you, whatever happened to Riot? How'd she end up?
She was sentenced to 12 years in jail. She got breast cancer, and she was told that you can apply for clemency. Is it plea for?
I'm not sure.
You could confess guilty, and we will, we will release you, and you will be cared for. You will be taken to hospital. She refused that. She was really, beyond brave, toughest journalists I ever met. And she appealed her sentence, got it down to 5 years. She spent her 5 years. Then when she was released, she received all the press freedoms awards in the world. She went to New York, she picked up the CPJ Press Freedom Prize and so on. And then she shocked everyone by kind of becoming the person she was accused of being. So she joined an armed guerrilla group.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So in a way, her years in prison pushed her into, becoming the one they accused her of being. In a way, I mean, she pledged her support for this group. And
What was the group?
One of the... It was not ONLF. It was one other of the... I mean... I forgot now. One of the armed resistance group in Ethiopia. Which also was terrorist labeled. Then eventually she started her own like TV show and from the United States, and she left, and now she lives in the state with her family, and she produces journalism.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So she survived the breast cancer.
Yeah, she survived. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now this is also a fairly lazy question that I'm sure you've been asked before. So I just want to see where you like to take it. But this experience clearly changed your life from a commercial perspective because it gave you a huge platform and a name, emotionally as well, like you alluded to earlier. But how do you reflect about 10 years on, maybe it's even still too close to the event, like how it changed your life?
I mean, I'm doing the same things now that I did before I went to prison. I go to places, I meet people, I write stories, I publish stories. So in a way, it didn't. It's what I'm good at and what I love doing. I've been maybe more convinced of the importance of journalism that doesn't always, beg for permissions or. And really felt the importance in looking into like overlooked corners of the world and covering blank spots and so on. So in a way, it didn't change what I do that much. Of course, in a way, it has closed some doors and opened other doors. For a while, like Ethiopia was in war with Eritrea, and after writing the book and everything and getting back into the saddle, I thought maybe this could be a 14-month-long visa application to Eritrea, a country in war with Ethiopia. Maybe they would look at my application with different eyes than any other journalist. And that was a time where no foreign journalists had been let into Eritrea for years and years. So I went with the book to the Eritrean embassy and explained that I want to go to Eritrea. I've been jailed by a country you're in war with. I have no illusions whatsoever when it comes to Ethiopia. I think you should give me a journalist visa. And eventually I was given a visa, kind of a unique visa, to go to Eritrea. And I went several trips and collected material to write a book, which was called The Search for David. And David Isak is a Swedish Eritrean journalist who has been jailed in Eritrea for 21 years now this autumn. So I could ask, hard questions to the ministers and people in Eritrea, but also try to understand the history of that country and why the situation it is such as it is, and could travel, from the sea to the mines in Western Eritrea, and I had a freedom that other foreign journalists doesn't have, and especially local journalists don't have at all. I mean, there is no free private press at all in Eritrea. So it opened, doors to other countries. And of course, it's easy for me now that if I'm doing a story about a chimney sweeper or something. If I go to that person's house, they will probably recognize me, and maybe they read the book, or so it means that people think they know me in a way, and it makes it easier to get contact and to get people's trust in telling me their stories, which is makes it easier to work in Sweden. But it's, I haven't had any post-traumatic stress or anything. I haven't suffered in that way from the experience. I went to a special trauma clinic. Sweden has taken a lot of refugees, so there is a lot of experiencing in handling especially mock executions from other refugees that went through this kind of trauma. So I went there just to get some tools and to handle stress and so on. And that it was good to know that there is help, to where I should go to find help if I would start, to feel bad or to become traumatic in a way. But it hasn't happened. What's been difficult is kind of the survivor's guilt in a way. Me and Johan were free. All the others were still jailed. Especially the years after we were free, there were this crackdown even more intense on journalists in Ethiopia, where bloggers and students and oppositional politicians were jailed. And then it felt like this kind of promise that I gave to the other inmates to kind of tell the world what I have seen. It felt really important to keep that promise. And but it's also kind of held you back in a way, because you were still there in the prison, trying to get them free. So I'd say 2018 was kind of a turning point when Ethiopia changed, and all the pressure from the democracy movement and from oppositional groups finally led to that the prime minister resigned, and the new prime minister, Abiy Ahmed, who took office, he released all the political prisoners, and he also received the Nobel Peace Prize and so on. And then, all my colleagues were free to go into exile or to start a newspaper or something. And for a couple of months at least, people had the freedom of speech in Ethiopia. Then eventually the wheels starting to turn backwards, and new problems arose when this state oppression was not there anymore. There were new conflicts between ethnic groups and between regions, and eventually also the old ruling party, TPLF, kind of went back to the north and started planning for a war. And I think also Abiy Ahmed started planning for a war immediately, towards this old ruling party. And for the last 2.5 years, we also had this brutal war in the north of Ethiopia, in the Tigray region. Also underreported war where, there are figures of 100,000 civilians who have died in that war, which is, not really on the media radar. So
that's more than the amount of civilians that have died in the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Yeah. So it's and it's, you're still attached to, you learn to love that country, and of course I'm following the developments closely, writing about it, also doing journalism about it, and hopefully one day I can, return to Ogaden and to Ethiopia and reach the villages I try to reach, and see how had the situation been there, or what is the situation there now. That would be a dream to do someday. But in short, I think it made me a better journalist, to get that perspective of, being on the other side in a way, and to feel that, to sleep next side to all of those people in that prison for so long time. It gave you perspectives that, I think makes you a better journalist.
Well, it's a phenomenal story, for sure. And one which I and probably a lot of other people, sort of would romanticize the adventure of at least being this sort of freelance journalist going into interesting places. But then as well, there is this whole other side of we'll never do something like that because there's something in you that made you take that risk, put yourself in that position. So many risks just to get there, and then to finally. So it's like,
but it's not like it's not the first story you do. I mean, before I went illegally into Ethiopia, I've been covering a lot of civil wars in India, in the Philippines, in Nepal, being with different rebellions, walking in the jungle. Of course, it's not. I mean, it's at the time we did that story that was kind of business as usual. Breaking a law, joining a movement, able to tell a story, I think that's you need that perspective. It's not like you from School of Journalism you go, hey, let's go into a country, but your boundaries push, and also you want to be a better and better journalist, and then you also need to do the kind of unique stories. Yeah.
Well, let me tee up a little bit of that. Not the first story you've done.
No.
So you're from Norrbotten, which...
Yeah, I was born there at least in Boden, but then I moved as a 3-year-old to Stockholm. So
okay.
To my mother's surprise, I don't speak as I should.
Okay, but just for the people watching, you could point to it on a map actually behind you.
Yeah.
And just for the people listening on audio, it is on the Arctic Circle, potentially right on it or above it.
Bum. Yeah, so Boden is here.
And the Arctic Circle, I think it's just south of Lofoten there. So maybe you're... But anyway,
I'm not sure.
It's really far north.
Yeah.
That's a great map, by the way.
Yeah.
But so it's, I mean, where we are right now in Stockholm, the latitude is that of northern Canada.
Yeah.
You're another, I don't know, 600-700 kilometers north, maybe more. It's just a crazy north remote rural place. Yeah. Anyway, so it's funny that from here. According to Wikipedia,
yes,
you reported from Thailand, Algeria, Philippines, UAE, Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Singapore, Cambodia, Bhutan, Dubai, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
That didn't mention India, which you just did.
Yeah.
So was it always going to be journalism? You're only in your early 40s now, right?
Yeah.
So that's a lot of experience packed into 15, 20 working years.
Yeah. I mean, I studied journalism rather late, I think. First, I studied political science. I studied economic history. I spent 2-3 years writing my master's in economic history, looking at Sankt Bartholomew, which is an island in the West Indies, which was a Swedish colony for 94 years. Okay. Sweden tried to be part of the slave trade. Our king, Gustav III, bought a colony from France, and then we tried to have a West India company. Wow, really? The Swedish, Far East India Company is rather well known, and
so Swedes are the colonialists as well.
We tried,
or
but
attempted.
We were late. So, we started at when the abolitionist movement just gained momentum. That's where Sweden joined, and we weren't really successful. The colony was mostly a disaster, apart from the Napoleonic Wars, where it was the harbor were used by many other countries. But still, I studied that kind of Swedish colonial experiment. But then I felt, let the dead bury the dead, in a way. Let's focus on what's going on today in the world. So then I applied for, if you had an exam, you could have this 1.5 year quick crash course in journalism. So I applied for that and studied that. And then after after that, I got a job at a monthly cultural paper as an editor, but always had this idea of, being a foreign correspondent. So I met a photographer at the time. His name was Jonas Gratzer. His name is Jonas Gratzer. And he also had the same dream, but he was, taking pictures of apartments for different, when an apartment was going to be sold, he was good at taking pictures of the rooms and so on. But then we just, we went to an Indian restaurant and we draw a map of Southeast Asia on a tissue. And we said, let's go to Nepal and try, So we took, I think, 2 weeks off, and we went to Kathmandu, and we did, everything under the sun. We did all the stories. We did 3-4 stories a day. And before going there, we bought or looked through all the papers at Pressbyrån. We have this, Sweden is a small country, it's a small language, but there is this huge magazine flora, there are magazines about everything in Sweden. So there's this dog magazine, there's this magazine for bus drivers, there is this magazine for, trade union magazine for nurses. And so we just went, let's find a street dog. How is the rabies situation in Kathmandu? Well, how is it to drive? How is to drive a bus in Himalaya? Yeah. And let's do some travel stories. Which is the best coffee in Kathmandu? This tea-loving country. Blah 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 for a coffee magazine, and we just the first homosexual parliamentarian. Blah 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 for QX, and eventually we managed to pitch as many stories, so that we felt after this trip that hey, let's just resign and travel together. And so then we started, and we traveled 200 days a year until I was arrested in Ethiopia. And did everything
and you just made it
went
work.
From country to country to country. Yeah, we found kind of the magic by doing everything.
Can you reveal the formula?
No, but just being prepared to do everything from travel to guerrillas to, which was kind of surreal. You go in the Philippines from walking 2 weeks with the guerrillas in the jungle, being also chased by the army airplanes, and then you fly to the next island and you do this travel story from this crystal beach, crystal clear water, and then you just do the next. So it was we made it work, and also always had 1 or 2 stories that we felt were the most important one, and then you had a couple of bread stories, so to say, that could finance the trip and the travel. But I remember also early on I wrote a lot about trafficking, and to be honest, it was because it was a topic that sold, sex sales, and also the work against sex slaves sells. There were always magazines interested in buying stories of victims for trafficking, and a lot of women magazines and so on. So we always did trafficking stories. And then during one of the stories, I was at this shelter for survivors in Kathmandu, and I was sitting next to, I still remember her name, it was Gita. She was 19 something. She had been lured away from her village into India, promised a job, which turned out to be a brothel. She had worked there for years. Then she managed to escape, and now she was back in Kathmandu at this center for survivors called Mate in Nepal. And she tells me her horrible story, and with all the details, and I, write them down, and I turn off my recorder and say thank you for the interview. And then I remember she leans forward and she puts her, hands on the table, and she just stares me in the eyes and says, "Why do you want to know this?" And I'm like, whoa, what happened? I was the one, telling the questions up until recently. And while I start to think about some kind of answer, but it's good, I can write this story, and then what happened to you, maybe it won't happen to others. And she's like, I've been here for years giving these interviews. So many times I tell my life story. What will happen when your story is published? And I'm like, it's hard. And I'm like, what will happen? And then she's like, why don't you talk to the people who bought me? Why don't you talk to the people who sold me? Why didn't you talk to the brothel owners? Why do all journalists come here to talk to me? I told my story so many times. And I just felt, dirty in a way. I felt like, am I part of this trafficking industry as well?
Oh my God.
This is my role is just, telling these stories. And then the photographer Jonas, he also said, but hey, let's go to the brothel in India, let's follow in the footsteps of the human traffickers. And suddenly, doing that, going to the crime scene, talking to the brothel owners, you understood that this is not about sex, this is about money. It's hugely profitable to run these brothels. The profits are really extreme, because you could sell, it's not like a product you sell once, you sell it, over and over and over and over again. And also all my knowledge from studying, the slave trade and economic history, suddenly that process, I understood the process more of, the financial economy of trafficking, and also that, you could focus a lot on poverty reduction in the villages, so you could focus on, start trying to stop people at the borders, which a lot of anti-trafficking things are focusing on. But if you need to kill something like slavery or trafficking, you need to hit the profit. You need to hire the alternative costs of running this business, and then you need to hit the brothels, and you need to hit the people making money out of this. And suddenly I saw the issue in kind of more clear terms. It's not an issue about people buying or selling sex, but it's an industry. And I mean, we managed to stop slavery once, by abolishing it and making it illegal and unmoral. So it's also possible to stop trafficking. But I think that also put me on the track to, okay, you need to go to the to the places where the crime happened. You need to go to the brothels. It's not enough just to talk to the victims, and so much of journalism of today is still just talking to the victims and listening to the victim's story. But there are perpetrators, there are people responsible, and we need to go there as well, to the crime scenes, and
that's
and
where
do
the
that
risk
job.
starts coming in.
That's when the risk starts coming in, and that's when it becomes really, really difficult. And the victims are so easy to get to. You have NGOs, and you have a whole industry of people who will help you, who will serve you the victims, like this girl Gita, being served for journalist after journalist after journalist to tell her story. But no one was really investigating, okay, but what's the name of this brothel? Who bought you? Who sold you? What was the cost? What's the cost of a condom? What does a beer cost? How does this equation look? The microeconomics of trafficking. How does it look? And by doing that, I felt the stories became better, and that's also something I took with me since Gita, told me some important things in my future journalism. So that was one kind of a turning point in how to work as a freelancer, and my responsibility as a freelancer, and the responsibility as a journalist, and the stories I tell and how I tell them, in a way.
I definitely get the sense that you've got an incredible sort of memoir, autobiography in you one day. So I don't want to just keep taking advantage of the time that you've allotted.
No worries.
But if you could perhaps tell a story that really stands out to you from the years before Ethiopia. You've just told this one about human trafficking. Just another experience that really stood out to you, that is one you created by putting yourself in the position, by taking the risk as a freelance journalist, by front-loading the cost, having no certainty of anything coming out on the other end.
I mean, in the early years, I did a lot in the Philippines. It's such an interesting country with, 600 years of Spanish colonialism and then 100 years under the United States. It creates this strange political cocktail of violence and vibrant civil society, and also everyone speaks English.
Imelda Marcos is one of the most movie villains of all time.
Yeah. And now, I mean, his daughter is elected, right? It's also strange, wasn't it?
No, it's Bonbon. It's the son of
It's
Fernand.
the son. Sorry, the son. Yeah.
But her son.
Yeah, her. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, so the Philippines was a place where I learned that you could find a lot of stories, and people were also brave enough to tell their stories. I mean, there are so many things. I remember the massacre in Mindanao, where 56 journalists were killed at the same time during. We were there shortly afterwards, together with one of the surviving journalists who was supposed to be on that press conference, but he never went. And just going over that hill and also going to the police station and seeing all these massacred cars, because what they did was they shot everyone and then they just buried. They had caterpillars with them and just made these huge holes which they put in the bodies and the cars and the buses, and with the satellite dishes and everything. It was basically a rivalry between the Ampatuans and Maguindadatus, two political families on this island. I mean, that's a point where you felt that this is a dangerous profession in a way, of course. I mean, walking with the NPA and also in the jungle, the New People's Army. That's where the photographer got sick. He was really sick, but he was treated by the guerrillas medics. And I don't know if that's a good story to tell. I remember I was also early on as a freelancer, and we walked for, days, and then we met this legendary rebel leader, Kaauris, and he had walked. He also walked for a week to meet us and something, and then when he sees me, he's like, where's your video camera? I'm like, I don't have a video camera. I'm a freelance journalist from Sweden. And he was so disappointed. But still, after a while, he of course told me his story. No, but maybe the story that from the Philippines, there was one, it has to do with trafficking actually. While we were there were two Swedish guys arrested for human trafficking in Mindanao, and we went to. They were in the city CDO, Cagayan de Oro, where they were arrested, and there was one dancer from the Malmö Opera and one IT technician from Stockholm. They had met in Thailand, and chose to go into the cyber sex industry. So they had started, together with local people, of course, they rented this house, and then they built like 20 cubicles, and then they had 20 girls working in these cubicles in front of live cameras and on the site livejasmine.com, which is like an internet sex page, and then people paid them to do different things from all over the world. And they thought they were innovative, before their time, and this was illegal in Thailand, but it was still legal in the Philippines, so they thought. But one of the girls is taken from another city to Cagayan de Oro, and after the police kind of hits and arrests them, she testifies that she didn't want to be there and she didn't want to work there. Some of the other girls say that this was a better job than what they had at the brothels, and they don't want to file charges against these two Swedes. So then we are there for, I think, 2 weeks, talking to everyone connected to this story, trying to tell it as nuanced as possible. They are later on convicted to life in prison. They are still there today. They tried to escape once, but they were arrested again, and are still imprisoned, because also in the Philippines this became a matter of national pride. Like, okay, we have these two foreigners abusing our women, So the trafficking law was really used as hard as possible. While, I mean, anyone who's been to the Philippines know that you have still whole cities that are like big brothels. So it's
or
there's a lot of
a detail from a book recently written by Nathan Lynch, who it's called The Lucky Laundry. It's a massive anti-money laundering expose in Australia, mostly. A lot of the most heinous sexual crimes, especially against children.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's in the Philippines.
It's horrible. It's horrible. So of course there are a lot of double standards to this issue.
But look, I'm just trying to think of whether this is just me being interested or whether this is something the audience would be interested in. Because in this part, there's a lot of projection from me. You know, like the thrill of the adventure, the call to action, the potential of doing something great, telling a great story, being involved in something great. You know, you're a young guy. You've just finished. You've sat down. You've drawn a map of Southeast Asia and said, "Let's go there. Let's do it." I mean, this adventurous part of you. Do you recognize that that's uncommon? It's unusual, you know, to really pull the trigger and actually do it. And at the time, did you feel that way, or was it just like, yeah, this is what we're gonna do?
I mean, I don't think it's the adventure that attracts me. I don't think that is the case for most Swedish, foreign correspondents or foreign reporters. I mean, if you were into adventure, you would climb mountains, or you would go rafting, or you would.
Well, not necessarily.
It's more of wanting to do.
That's action.
Yeah, but you want to do. You want to do something unique. You wanted to do this. You want to be the best journalist there is. You want to file this story that really changes things. I think that is the motivation, really. It's not. I mean, I met reporters and photographers that are really, they are there for the adrenaline, for the rush, for the kicks. I've seen those guys. I don't. And maybe as a photographer, you need to have that more, because you can't really miss the opportunity while it's there. But I mean, it's a boring answer.
Okay, but let's do this.
There are good forces and bad forces, but I don't think. I mean, for me, you mentioned Norrbotten, but I also, my mother worked for SIDA for a couple of years. I grew up in Botswana in the south.
You did,
yeah.
Now there's a detail.
So I spent, when I was like 9, 10, 11, I lived there. And of course, that gave you perspectives on the world, and also kind of an understanding that the world is bigger than Sweden. Also coming home, turning 11, 12, and, you have no idea who Madonna is or who Michael Jackson is, but you know everything about African antelopes and snakes. And
wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
So that was, kind of a tough time in school to watch MTV and try to learn, okay, who are these people that I should know of? And no one was interested in my knowledge in, the difference between Thomson or Grant's gazelle. I think having that background, and also from early on, traveling a lot. When I was 17, when I went to Vietnam, one of my first, backpacking trips, you could say. So maybe it wasn't such a big step, to go freelancing for me, because I had been traveling and kind of traveling in the world before that.
Look, Martin, we've been going 3.5 hours. I'm gonna wrap it up with 4 questions. 2 that I like to ask every guest, and then 2 that are very much for you. Who are adventurers, journalists that you admire? They don't have to necessarily be alive, but just people that you, if if they read your work, you would really, really want to impress them. So what do we have here?
We have Alexievich.
Okay.
This is the Alexievich.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, she has written a lot from Sink Pojkar about the Soviet Union's war in Afghanistan. I mean, I really love her way of writing, her way of compiling a lot of stories and voices into one narrative. She is one. I mean, I was a great admirer of Robert Fisk. I think he was, brave, and he was really had his own voice in seeing both the micro and the macro level in his stories. He both had the families, and he had the geopolitical and the political dimension as well. I mean, the one that I really admire today is the guy who does this Out of Eden walk. Forgot his name now, but he's doing this National Geographic project where he walks around the globe. He started in Ethiopia 7-8 years ago and walked through in the traces of mankind through.
Wow, cool.
Out of Africa, and then through Saudi Arabia, and now he's in China, which will take him like 8 months to pass.
What a legend.
And he's talking to people on the way, and it's such a humble way to meet people, not to come with an airplane, but oh, I walked here from Ethiopia.
Out of Eden.
Yeah, what's happening? How's your life? And no, I love his dispatches and his view on journalism, and really this slow journalism, taking it to the extreme, really. And also finding these stories that are not about a conflict or a war, but still determine the fate of humanity in a way. How do we grow crops? How do we adapt to changing weather? Yeah, I really love his. I forgot his name now. Those are three. Bum bum bum. Dun dun dun. I mean, when it comes to Sweden, we have one journalist, Magda Gad. She was one of the blankspot founders many years ago, but she was recruited to Expressen. I think she changed the game in a way that she doesn't go home. She stays in the story. She lived in Kabul now for 4 or 5 years. Wow. And I think that's also a perspective that we need in journalism, that the time is over when we can just fly in, and do our story and fly back. We need to spend more time in the regions that we are covering. So yeah, she's also the one that I read with. Yeah.
Nice. That's a good mix.
Yeah.
Advice for young people who would listen to this podcast and think, wow, that Schibbye guy, I like that. Yeah. I would like to also.
Don't take advice from a dead guy. Isn't that an expression? Don't take advice from a jailed shot guy. Do this. No, but
you know what I mean. I'm not trying to.
No. Knowledge by heart. Really, learn things that you could take, that you could remember if the shit really hits the fan, and figure eights. Remember to run in figure eights if you're ever locked up.
But for example, you said you could go to the Pressbyrån, was it?
Yeah,
Pressbyrån?
exactly. Yeah,
and you could look at all the magazines.
Yeah,
is that still the case right now? If you want to really survive as a freelancer,
I'd say now I would start in a different end. I mean, now I would turn directly to the listeners, viewers, or readers. Like, start a podcast or a vlog or a Substack. I mean, there are so many possibilities now for young aspiring journalists that were not there when I started. So it's just, you could crowdfund in the beginning, smaller assignments, and then larger and larger, and just try and find ways to reach your own generation in a way that they will, in the way that they want the world, packaged. I said, yeah, that would be my advice. I mean, no one will give you this job as a foreign correspondent. You'll have to create it, for yourself.
Amazing. And finally, 2 questions I like to ask as many guests as possible. What is a country that you're particularly bullish on?
Bullish, like I don't like it, or like no.
No, bullish is, say, if you could purchase a piece of it, you would expect it to increase in value. But value is how you determine it. I'm not talking about a country with a great economic future.
No, like
just a country you would like to invest in.
I mean, flying over Somalia, seeing the shores, the kilometer, mile after mile after mile of white beaches. And,
wow, we've never had Somalia.
It's
so why?
I mean, it's so pristine and unique, and once there's peace in Somalia, you have the most beautiful coastline that you could ever think of. It's really the Somalian coastline.
Interesting. And finally,
yeah,
we've now made it to the end.
Yeah.
If you could witness a conversation between any two people of history, dead or alive, no language barrier. So listen to a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you listening to?
I would like to hear what Bildt says to Ian Lundin and the other Lundin family at the board meeting after they are become aware of that they are charged for human rights violation for their operations in Sudan. I would like to hear what they have to say to each other.
Amazing. Mr.
Thank
Schibbye.
Thank you so much.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
really. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, thank you again, Martin Schibbye. We sat, I don't know, for 4 hours or something at the end of a work day, just recording and chatting. And I think because he's such a nice guy, he couldn't say to me, Ryan, shut up, let's turn this shit off and let's go home. So again, another guy just extremely generous with his time. So thank you, Martin, for that. It was an incredible experience for me to meet you, sit in your office and do this in person. I 110% prefer doing these podcasts in person. And finally, my ambition for this podcast, it is to corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities in whatever country it is that you're listening in from. Now, what does that actually mean? There's no categorization for eclectic curiosities. There are no lists for me to appear on or compete on for eclectic curiosities. Instead, all I can do is ask you to leave fat, juicy, healthy, energy-inducing reviews. Please pump that good juice into the algorithm. Swipe up your apps now. You've got Spotify, leave 5 stars. You've got Apple, leave 5 stars a review. Leave all the good stuff. And that is all from me. Until next week, thank you, my dear and generous listener, and as well to you, Mr. Schibbye. Oh, I should also mention, he's got a movie on Netflix, 438 days. A book, 438 days. If the book sells enough copies, Martin has agreed that I can narrate the audiobook. So, buy the books, watch the movie. All the best. Ciao.